everybody. Welcome to Technical Perfection. I'm your host, Bill Whittle, and this is the show where we talk about streaming video and how to be sure that your video goes out there perfectly the first time, because you got people lined up watching your show, and the last thing you want to have is any kind of technical problem or anything. So, yeah, so we're basically going to be talking tech streaming tonight, and that's about all of that faux sarcasm I can handle. I was just mentioning that start this thing from home often and come in, and I came in just now and it was just stopped working. But of course, you have no way of knowing that because you're watching this recorded on YouTube, and maybe I made the whole thing up. To think about that, maybe I made the whole thing up. Anyway, here we are. It's good to see everybody. Usually start with a little rant of some kind. I don't have a whole lot of ranting to do. I can tell you the scripts for the thing are getting done. 6 is delivered, almost finished with 7. There's only 8 of them, so we are approaching the time when I can get back to full-time attention to the members here at BillWhittle.com. You'll be interested to know that I found out earlier today. I wasn't 100% sure, but I confirmed it today. The Cold War, what we saw, the video version of it, which we shot back in October, the first 2 episodes are going to premiere on Tuesday. First 2 episodes of the Cold War, what we saw, are going to appear on Tuesday on Daily Wire Plus, and then 1 episode every Tuesday from that point on. So that's really, really exciting. And it's, it's just remarkable. Now, I don't know how to explain this, but it's very funny, actually. Deep says, I know that Doomcock isn't going to be happy that F-22s are shooting down his reconnaissance balloons. That's actually hilarious. They should all have the Doomcock logo on the side. That would add a lot to the terror. Anyway, I don't know how to explain it, whether it's a combination of lighting. I know the makeup, they kind of slick my hair down, give me a kind of a 50s haircut, but my hair looks white. It just looks white. I guess it's just the lighting or something. Every time I turn it on, it's like, who the hell is this guy? But with that said, every episode has got a brand new, 13 different costume changes and skinny ties, and the wardrobe people were fantastic, and it looks just fan-freaking-tastic. Yes, some people are saying, well, wish you could buy it from Daily Wire and stuff. I am going to make a concerted effort again to see. I cannot promise anything. We just saw with the Steve Crowder Daily Wire thing that Jeremy's a hard-nosed businessman. But what I would like to do, and what I don't think is unreasonable from a proposal point of view, but technically on their end may be tough. But what I would like to do is I'd like to make the show available to BillWhittle.com members. If we can find a way to do that, we're not sucking a huge portion of his audience away. And thank you. I like the shirt too. That's a great color. I love this. Gator blue is the best blue, and Gator orange is the best orange. And that's a little, yeah. All right. So I would say the chance of this is probably hovering around maybe 20%. Nevertheless, it's a possibility, and I'll see if I can get that resolved tomorrow. But it will be out there. And by the way, my pitch would be: listen, Jeremy, can you give us a private link for our guys? And if so, think about all of the volumes, the oceans of members that I'm going to send your way, and that are going to sign up for your Daily Wire Plus. Like I said, I think it's relatively unlikely, but it's worth a try. However, it is terrific. Fire Chicken Racing says, where can we listen to your Cold War series? It was available on Apple Podcasts, I know for a fact, and I think it still is there, the audio only. But we recorded the audio 2-3 years ago, and now we just shot the video, and they put some money into it. So, certainly not unreasonable for them to want to put it on and it's on Spotify too. Thank you, Infidel. In any event, or even a PPV. What's a PPV, Bart? Is that pay per view? Right, I see. Okay. Yeah, we'll see. I'll see. Um, in any event, Dave Big Booty wants to know, is it still called Esoteric Radio Theater? No, it isn't. The first Apollo 11, what we saw was Esoteric Radio Theater, and so was, I want to say, the Cold War audio broadcast, which again is a couple years ago. They wanted to set up something that separated them from the political thing of Daily Wire, so they created this really cool company called Esoteric Radio Theater. But somewhere several years ago, I guess they just decided it was not so smart to split the brand. So, in any event, how all of this, rambling and mumbling and outgassing aside, it is I've now done the first notes pass on episode 5, and I've got 6 waiting for me. I have a super chat from a deplorable Boomer Rube. That's my name. Love all the Bill Whittle shows, and I recommend subscribing and becoming a member. Thank you very much for paying for my advertisement. That's very, very nice of you. Anyway, the shows are really remarkable. I'll tell you what's kind of interesting angle on this. As you probably know by now, before I started doing this on-camera stuff, I was an editor. I was a Hollywood editor, and I did a bunch of documentaries. That's what I did. Stuff for History Channel and Discovery and that kind of thing back when those channels were talking about history and discovery and things. And so, documentary filmmaking editing is kind of tough because you've got a voice track and then you just got to fill the picture. Now, in my lucky case with the Cold War series and the Apollo 11 series, the sets that they built means that most of the show can stay on me, which is, of course, where it should be. Anyway, the thing about the notes pass is I'm looking at other editors working on my show now, and I don't get to see any of it except for the they put together a pretty finished rough cut, really very nearly finished, and then they give it to me for notes. And virtually all of the notes that I make are, in fact, I think I've done hundreds and hundreds of notes, and there's probably only 2 or 3 that don't fit into this category. Editors will pull video footage and stick it up there and kind of throw it against the wall, see if it'll fly. I'll give you a couple of examples real quick, but real fast, we have from Blank Frankie a super chat that says, love from the People's Republic of Australia, Bill. Hope you're feeling better. I am, fellow comrade. Our People's Republics of California and Australia are only separated by a mere Pacific Ocean. And John Frost with another super chat says, all hail the gnarly knob of Claven Hail. I have no idea what you're talking about. Crikey. So I'm looking at this rough cut that other editors are sending to me, and it's done by very, very good editors, but they're not military guys. They don't have expertise in an area that I have. And I saw some of this too with the space stuff, but almost always with the Cold War and stuff. So I'll have a line about troops, the Russians moving from here or there or whatever. And, I'll give you a specific example that was just a perfect example. So one of these episodes, I think the second episode of the Cold War series, is called Two Bombs. And it's really a chance for me to basically just reiterate on my true story of the atomic bombs. And that whole episode is essentially about the two bombs, because you can't understand the Cold War without understanding the Soviets have masses of conventional men, tanks, and equipment, and we got atomic bombs. So I basically tell the story of the development, the deployment of the atomic bombs in the second episode of the Cold War. Now, just as one specific example, I start talking about the B-29. I said, and of course, the atomic bomb, and of course, the means to deliver it. The remarkable B-29 bomber, which arguably is alongside of the Me-262, the most advanced aircraft of World War II. It's a great line, and I'm looking at the rough cut, and there's the B-29 and everything, and there's a picture of an ME-262, and sure enough is an ME-262, all right. It's just got roundels on the tail. It's got the RAF roundels on the tail. And I'm thinking, that's not going to do it. It's a great example. All of the examples of the notes that I have to fix are like that. The editors, naturally enough, get as close as they can, but they don't really have that level of granularity in terms of the historical knowledge. So all I do basically is go through a rough cut and drop 40 notes, maybe 50 notes. This isn't from World War II. This is from World War I, or these aren't Russian troops. They're German troops, or this isn't the. I saw one today where the line said something like, I was looking at, I was reviewing episode 5, which is called The Forgotten War, about the Korean War. And I've got a line there where I talk about the South Korean Air Force at the time of the invasion from the north. As I say, South Korean Air Force was stuck with next to nothing, just a handful of airplanes. And they put up an image, and then I say most of it consists of the AT-6 Texan trainer. So when I say handful of airplanes, they've got a picture of an F-86 up there, which is a monster airplane and one of my all-time favorite aircraft. Anybody who loves airplanes loves the F-86. That was not the fighter we started the Korean War with, but it's the one we ended it with. A remarkable airplane and a remarkable, just a perfect weapon in the hands of these World War II pilots 5 years after the war. And I'm talking about how essentially how completely unprepared and under-equipped the Republic of Korea's Air Force was. And there's a picture of an F-86. And I'm thinking, Bill, that's got to go. I know that, well, see, this is a reflection on the incredible quality of you guys. You could put that picture up there, and I suppose if you showed it to a general audience, most people would just not even think about it. But with this audience, it's got to be right. I mean, it's really got to be right. I look at this stuff with a jeweler's loop on. I'm just like, no, that's not quite right. Because if I don't catch it, I will hear about it. So, yeah, the Korean War story, and again and again and again, this is the thing that's happening to me with the series I'm writing now. I know the story I want to tell. I know the story I pitched, and I know what the beats are going to be, and I know what I need to do in this episode. So I know enough about it to be able to lay those things out. But when I start doing the research on like one specific thing or something like that, the next thing you know, hello, Elderberry, USAF retired. Awesome. Were you, what you do in the Air Force, if you don't mind me asking? So I got to get it right. I mean, they've got to get it right. And after the first 2 episodes of notes, I would just say something like, well, this you might want to put in like, for example, I was talking about excellent fighter planes that we had in Korea, and they put up a picture of a T-30 shooting star. I'm sorry, the F-80 shooting star. And I said, yeah, you might want to replace this with an F-86. And as time goes on, I began to realize these guys don't really know what that is. So now it takes me more time, but it makes it easier for them. Anytime I have a replacement, I just go out and find a picture of what it should be. I just find the picture. Here's the link. And save them some time because, they are, we're getting pretty close to release date. So, yeah. So 4 or 5 days from now, you'll get to see episode 1 and episode 2 of the Cold War. And I've been talking about it for a long time. And I'm just very, 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 very proud of it. The guys who I work with they're just a absolute wonder, They really are. And, there you go. I'm a little concerned about one thing. We have here in the magical world of Bill.com studios here, all kinds of software that have to be run by the idiot who's in front of the camera. And I did a sound check when we started this thing, and everybody said, microphone sounds great. And then I realized it is sounding good. It's going out live, but the microphone is hot, but the audio input capture isn't. So it's possible. Oh, I am echoing again. All right. You know what I'm going to do? I apologize for this. I just want to make sure I catch it now rather than later. Yeah, let me just check. Hang on, everybody. Just be cool. Just be cool, man. Because I know it makes me look absolutely, utterly, completely incompetent, like I just don't care. But honestly, it changes. It changes all the time. So I'm going to just listen to what I recorded earlier. You can hear a little bit of me. I just want to see what this has to say. Okay, that's not great. Hang on. Okay, hang on. Let's try this. Digital out. Okay, so I can hear him. I can hear that fool now. And let me check the inputs. Again, I just want to get this off my chest, because we deal with this all the time. All right, now I got 5 people talking to me. I'm going to hope that does it. And if it doesn't, then this is a special show just for the 163 people watching on YouTube and the 63 watching on Twitch. Anyway, enough about this silliness. The last thing I'll just say about it is it's not like I don't care or don't prepare. It's just that Gremlins and Foo Fighters appear while I'm sleeping, and they come in and start messing around with all the buttons and dials and knobs and stuff. It's just I actually think it's him, to be perfectly honest with you. So that's that. The what we saw Cold War thing will start on Tuesday. Daily Wire. Now, Art Techie says, you're not a tech, Bill. We understand. That's true, but I'm not a complete. I'm not as much of an idiot as the show would lead you to believe. That's basically. My audio's not synced anymore. No. I think. I don't know. I I just want. I just. I just want somebody to fix it. Please. All right. Yeah, it is anime hair. And I'd like to have anime hair for the next thing I shoot because I'm tired of doing these Cold War specials where I look like Ward Cleaver. Okay, so we're fine. We're whatever. But I don't know why it happens. It just does. So that's one thing, I guess. And another thing, completely separate topic. Taps 556 with the Leave Britney Alone. That legend of the internet is something I haven't seen in probably almost 10 years. That guy was ahead of his time, wasn't he? That guy was the guy who did Leave Britney Alone. Kind of a trans kid. He was miles ahead of the pack. Okay. A flock of seagulls here. Be careful. They're a little frizzy, I think. So the other thing that I've been doing a lot since last Stratosphere Lounge show, and I mentioned it for a little bit on the Stratosphere Studio show last Monday, is well, I find a YouTube channel and I'll usually just binge it. If I find something I really like, I'll just binge it. One of the people who I liked very much was JT at Odin's Men, and he is on the razor's edge of just being Stefan Molyneux. I suspect that's what's going to happen to him. Let me just grab this super chat before I forget. From Blubba818. Is that right? Put my cogitation spectacles on here. Yeah, Blubba818. I don't know if it's your area code, neighbor, but if it is, it's great. He just said with a super chat that says, I just finished America's Forgotten Heroes, and it was excellent. I'm looking forward to more series. Thank you for all your work, Bill. Thank you very much for that, Blubba. You know what? Before I talk about this thing I was just about to talk about, before I was talking about the thing I was talking about, I'm going to talk about one other thing that I was talking about before I talked about what I'm about to talk about. My my hope is that once I get the thing that's been sitting on my shoulders for the last 6 months off my shoulders, and we talked about this briefly before, I'm going to pitch doing 5 of the 7 America's Forgotten Heroes episodes, not as with me on camera. I'm going to pitch doing them as feature films, not as documentaries, feature films. There's 7 of those, and there's 2 of them that I don't think we could do. At least not right now, anyway. One of them is Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, because that episode is more about leadership. It's all over the place. And plus, of all the people I mentioned, he's the one that's been done the most. And the other one that's a little dicey is Dick Rutan, because he's still here. I don't know. It's just, believe it or not, it's harder to reproduce like the 80s than it is to 1980s than it is to reproduce the 1880s in a lot of cases. I'm not saying this is going to happen. I haven't even pitched it yet, but that's what I'd like to do. So that would mean, I think that of America's Forgotten Heroes, here's what I think would make super feature films. Frank Luke, that'd be the one I would pitch for the start. John Paul Jones, Booker T. Washington, that movie needs to be made. The story of Taffy 3 and the story of the Doolittle Raiders. I think all of those would be fantastic. And somebody's saying crowdsource it. Well, we're going to do something. And this applies to the colonies too. I'm working with the producer that's worked with Jeremy before. We're gonna put it together. We're gonna figure out what I want, not what he wants, and then we're gonna say, here's what we want, and we can give up this, but this has to stay. And there we go. Denzel Washington is Booker T. Washington. It's not a bad call, actually, Eric. He was probably a little younger for most of the story. The Booker T. Washington story is, well, I almost said I don't understand why nobody's made it, but it's the same reason they haven't made any of the others, right? The people in charge of our entertainment are not interested in showing American heroes. In fact, they're very interested in making sure that you don't see them. And the Frank Luke story, to me, is the easiest one to do. It's got the smallest number of cast members, least effects. Dave Chappelle for Booker T. Washington. Dave Big Booty, that's a damn good idea. Really? Anyway, oh my gosh, Troy's wants to know how you Horkheimer. That triggers PTSD memories in me. I don't really know how to do that. But yeah, to do them right. And there is certainly the technology to do the effects is nothing like what it cost before. So if I had the chance to do all of them, I would hand Booker T. Washington off to somebody else. And I would do Frank Luke first, and then I'd do John Paul Jones, and then I would do the Doolittle Raid, and then I would wrap it up with Taffy 3. How the story of Taffy 3 is not... I can't believe that nobody's done it. Anyway, so those need to be done. So enough about that. I just thought I'd loop back and mention that since somebody mentioned America's Forgotten Heroes. So, and Sasquatch 1791 says, did I see Devotion? It's sad it was a box office flop. I really liked it. I didn't see it. I did see, I saw a couple clips. I saw the clip of them making the raid on the bridge. One of the things they did there was something I've talked about on the show before. It's more an entertainment thing, so we'll save it for Monday. But when you've got computer graphics, you have to shoot that as if it was shot from an airplane or from the ground. Because when these airplanes go roaring past the camera like they did in Red Tails, the camera shakes. No. So I thought they did a terrific job with the aircraft in the one little clip I saw from Devotion, because they they didn't overdo it. Okay, so enough about that. Changing subjects into a completely different gear here. So I was talking about these YouTube channels that I like and that I binge watch. And this guy JT has a channel called Odin's Men. He had a channel called uh, Jameson's Travels and Ivar Blood Axe. He had three channels, and they took two of them down and gave him two strikes on his Odin's Men channel, which is the one I've been watching. Uh, Over the course of the time I've been watching him, probably 3 4 months, he's been well, you know who I should get for Booker T. Washington? Damn comment section. Mikael T. Williams. That's who I should get. He's the guy who played Bubba on Forrest Gump, and I know him. He's not super well, but he's a great guy. He'd be an interesting choice. Anyway, so so Odin's Men starts out, like I said, I binge watched a lot of it. A year ago, several months ago, he's trying to understand. He's looking at these TikToks of all of these lunatics, and he's trying to understand them. And the more of them he sees, right, the more of these woke TikToks he sees. And that's where the ship's going down. Over the course of months, the angrier he kind of gets. Uh, Eric says Bubba has big gums. Though no, that's just that. Honest to God, no, that's not a special effect. That's Michael T. That's Michael T. Williams acting. Because when you see him, it's hard. I was introduced to him by Gary Sinise while I was talking with Gary Sinise, and John Voight came over and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Bella." But when I met him, I didn't recognize him because all of that whole look is him. It's just him acting. So anyway, back to JT. So I've watched him get angrier and harsher, which I like because that's what these people deserve. But I've watched the rhetoric get ratcheted up, and I remember thinking, this is how slowly they boil the frog, right? I remember thinking, man, I don't know, GT, you're getting pretty close to the edge here. So all of a sudden, out of the clear blue sky, I can't find his channel. I suspect he had a week off strike, because when you get a strike, they don't let you post for a week. So he's all of a sudden saying, here's where you can find me on Rumble, here's where you can find me on all these other things. JT from a channel called Ed Smith, about a channel called Odin's Men. And basically he's a 50-something-year-old former Marine, and he is just talking about these lunatic, generally Gen Z, woke zombies. I love his channel because he's not, when I say not sophisticated, he's not sophisticated in the entertainment business. That's why he's a real guy. So he just looks at it like like a former Marine who worked his whole life and just starts taking these people apart. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. He's a retired Marine. I thought it was former Marine and not ex-Marine. My apologies to all the Marines out there. He's a retired Marine. I understand there's a big difference, and I tried to get it right, but I didn't. So apologies to all our jarhead friends out there, Leathernecks, and all the rest of the guys. So yeah, so he goes after fat activists and feminists and all the rest of it. So all of a sudden, I'm saying I haven't seen an Odin's Men video in like 4 or 5 days. Maybe he decided to take a break off, take a little time. And then when he comes back, he's basically saying, here are some links you need to get. Contact me on the website and get on the mailing list, because he thinks he's about to be have the plug pulled on him. And I remember thinking, wow, man, you're getting kind of close to the line there. And it's like, why do we have to do this? Why do we have to have this line? Because these people are terrified of the truth. It can't be allowed. So concurrently with this, while I was wondering where his videos were, I'm poking around, and then I found a new YouTube guy who's just been binge watching for the last 4 days. And this guy was so good. I'd wanted to interview JT. I'd wanted to interview this guy. This guy's name is Kenneth Samuels. He's a extraordinarily what's the word I'm looking for? It just when you're so perfectly put together, in terms of like your just the whole grooming thing and the clothes. He's just spot on, spot on erudite guy. He's an image consultant, and he basically would talk to these women, would call in his show. And his entire thing is basically trying to snap women out of it. No, not eloquent. He's extremely eloquent. He's just everything about him. The tie is perfect. The suit is perfect. The set is perfect. He, Jesus says gay. No, close though. He doesn't come off at all gay. He's not gay. But in any event, I love his stuff, and I'll tell you why I love about him in a minute. So I'm watching all of this stuff, right? And then and while I'm watching it, every now and then I keep seeing something like, "Oh man, we really miss him." Oh, R.I.P. Kevin Samuels. What? And I let the first couple of those go. And then I see it again and again, and I do a quick search, and it turns out this guy had a heart attack, died at age 54, about a year ago, a little over a year. Polished. That's still not the word. You know what the word I'm looking for is? It's more of a British term, really. He was exceptionally well bred, right? Everything was perfect. He was a sharp dressed man. And all the details were perfect. And that gave him enormous credibility, in addition to what he was saying, giving him a lot of credibility. So it turned, no, he wasn't a dandy at all, Dave Big Booty. He was the opposite of a dandy. He didn't come off as a dandy at all. He just came across as an extraordinarily, yes, that's right, Tiki Rocket, he's a well-dressed, dignified gentleman who takes his job seriously. So, no, he's not a queer. Thomas Bombadil, just queers everywhere. Yes, he is on the internet. That would make you think he's a queer, but he's not. He's not a queer at all. So I'm loving the guy, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But I find out that he just goes down. Now I have to. Calmex in the YouTube stream just said, well, since I don't want to go the way of Stefan Molyneux until we can sue these bastards. For dapper is another great word. Thank you, Coffee Shinato. Somebody in the comments just here said, Calmex just said, does it have anything to do with the Victrola that he bought? And I thought, I hadn't thought about that. I need to look up the date. It's possible, but it was hypertension, high blood pressure, and he's so calm, but I think it got to him. Natty is another good word. We're playing the vocabulary game. Polished, all of these things. I cannot recommend him highly enough. They call him the Godfather. And here's what's interesting about this guy to me. And this is the world we live in. I'd like to just live in a world where I didn't have to talk about his appeal as a black influencer, because he was just speaking the truth, right? But his standards were so high. This kind of ties into Booker T. Washington, actually, because that's exactly what Booker T. Washington was. He was a guy who just said, we are going to hold ourselves to such a standard that the antidote to prejudice is excellence. And that's what he did. So when I found out he had died at like 54 or something, I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. He's in trim anyway. I it's not like I took a shower with the guy or wanted to, but he looks like he was in top condition, and not in a gay way either, by the way. I'm just talking about a couple guys after a basketball game or something. But he's he died 10 years younger than me, and I don't know. But here's what his work survives. So let me tell you what I've learned politically about our society as a result of having stumbled upon Kevin Samuels a year or two after he died. There's a lot of stuff of his out there. And by the way, when I first saw him, I saw him through other people's channels. I saw him through young black men reacting to his videos and talking about how incredible he was. And so basically, here's what his content has made so clear to me, because I've seen he interviews. He had a show really mostly for men, but the stuff that really got all the traction was he interviews women. And And having seen 25 or 30 of these things now, I really begin to realize what just how deep the pathology is out there. Just because these are interesting points, Calmeck says that Thomas Sowell is another perfect example of that. Yes, he would be. Thomas Sowell would be a if 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 Booker T. Washington had lived to be an old man, he died in his I want to say in his 50s too. Then then Thomas Sowell would have been great. But that kind of thing, right? Thomas Sowell is a living example of the fact that you cannot watch Thomas Sowell, listen to Thomas Sowell speak. He he simply destroys any racist argument by his presence. Just not just by what he says, but by how he says it and his bearing and his calm. Booker T. Washington was exactly that guy. And the whole point of the Booker T. Washington America's Forgotten Heroes episode is we could have gone Booker T. Washington's way and striven for excellence, or we could have gone the W.B. Du Bois way and striven for grievances. And we went down the wrong road. And once again, we're living in the evil timeline. So here's what Kevin Samuels did. He wouldn't go looking for people. People would call in his show, and he was a private image consultant. I'm sure he charged a lot of money. He was worth every penny. If he was still alive, I would call him for a consultation, which of course would end up being him asking me for advice. But that ship has sailed now. So it's constant variations on the same thing. Women call him because they are in their mid to late 30s. All of them want, here's the term, high value men, right? HVMs. They want high value men. And they don't know why they can't get them. That's why they call them. They want advice on how they can get high value men. All of these women, and they're virtually all of them are, professionals. And he is so direct. Looks like Tom Bombadil said, I just watched 4 seconds of Kenneth Samuels, and he's telling a young girl that the world does not owe her understanding. If she has all of this trauma, go seek professional help. The world does not need to suffer you. Yes. So here's what he does. Women call him up, modern women. And once he became established, most of the reason that they called him up was to argue with him. Because they want to call him up and argue with him. And they want to argue with him because what he's saying to these women is, you're 38 years old. You have 2 kids. How tall are you? What's your dress size? What do you weigh? And how would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? 7's not allowed, which is another piece of brilliance. Is it the eternal 7s? He says, I'm going to take 7 off the table because 7, if you take 7 out of how do people rate yourself, if you take 7 out, that means you either got to with a 6 or an 8, right? But taking out because everybody wants to go, what's safe? I want to flatter myself, but I don't want to look too much. I'll go with the 7. Nope. So he asked them this, and they all think that they're 8s or higher. He asks them, how tall are you? What do you weigh? And then he'll say to them, basically, ma'am, this is delusional. You want a high value man. You just sat here in the last 10 minutes, told me you want to marry a man that makes at least $200,000-300,000 a year, and you want him to come into your life, be the father to your child. You're at an age where he's not likely to have kids with you, or at least if he does, you have one of them. These kind of men making this kind of money have lots and lots of options, and they're interested in looks. They're interested. He said that was the 3 F's: femininity, friendliness, and fitness, plus loyalty, I think maybe, and submission was one of them. So the same conversation again and again and again. It's always fantastically illuminating because it shows you 2 things. First of all, it shows you the degree of corrosion that has occurred on people's souls and intellects as a result of the self-esteem movement. All of these women in their late 20s, early to late 30s are all a product of the self-esteem movement. And all of them think that they're going to end up with what they want because they've been told their whole lives you can have whatever you want, you can do it all. You can be a business owner, and you can be a wife, and you can have a family, and you can make millions of dollars and all the rest of it. So he will basically have these women call, and he'll essentially say, well, so tell me what it is you bring to the table. And what she'll do is, she would say, like, well, I have my own business, and I make $160,000 a year, and I've got my stuff in shape, financially, and he'll just stop him. He'll just stop him and say, "Ma'am, men don't care about any of that. We don't care about your money. It's not even in the top 10 things we consider. We don't need you to make the money. We know that the money you do make is essentially, you're never going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on me. This thing's going to work the other way around. You want a guy who's making all of this cash." And you also want him to be 6 foot tall with the six pack, the 3 6s, 6 foot, 6 figures, and six pack. And all of these women, here's the thing that's really so telling about this. All of these women genuinely think that they're going to get these guys. And these women are not 8s and 9s. Some of them are 5s on a good day. And depending on how nasty they are, he tries to be polite, but they won't listen. And this is the thing that I thought was most striking about his content, right? He's not only telling these women the truth, but they come to him knowing that he's going to tell them the truth, and they spend 40 minutes arguing with him about how that's not going to be them, right? So he'll say, "So look, ma'am, how tall are you? I'm 5'5". What do you weigh? 182. Okay, well, ma'am, you weigh more than the man you're looking for. And the men you're looking for, the kind of men you're looking for, don't want to be married to women that weigh more than they do. So what is it you bring to the table?" And she said, "Well, I've got a great personality. I've been working on myself. I'm doing, I'm all of these things." He's saying, "Doesn't matter. We don't care about any of that stuff." And then he gets to kind of the point after, and pretty much, again, this is constantly there. Towards the end of this, he'll say, "Ma'am, we've been talking for a half an hour, and you're bringing in all of this combativeness and all of this masculine energy. And this is the one thing that men will just run away." Like as the waves, a YouTuber named Kevin Samuels, who's just my new binge, because of what he's showing me. And so what we've got, thank you very much. Ice9 says, "My hair is between styling and chaos." That's the way I like it. Yes, and exactly right. And Sad Wings Raging says, "Can't cook." They can't cook. They can't do anything. But his main point is that they're combative people. They're just constantly trying to argue him out of what he has told them and told other women. And this is the point I want to get to politically for Stratosphere Lounge today before I go to questions, right? It's not just him. I see it with JT on Odin's Men. I see it with all of the transsexual activists. I see it with the feminists. I see it with everybody. They are trying to argue you into their insanity. They think they can talk you into their insanity and their delusions. We've talked before about the transsexual thing is like, it's just like it's such an obvious dead end. Think about what's going on here. This is the thing. This entire 2 generations now, millennials and Gen Zers, not all of them. We have several of them. If we've got 3 or 4 of them here watching the show, that's probably all there is in the whole country. But basically, they're all suffering under this delusion. It's not their fault. I have to keep reminding myself that. They didn't raise themselves. This is what they were told by their parents. But all of them believe, since they've all gotten the participation trophies in all their lives, they've been told that, no, you are the best of everything. You are unbelievable. What did you just drew that with a crayon? My God, let's put that up in a museum. You're the best artist I've ever seen. And after 25, 30 years of this, you end up with people who are absolutely delusional. And Kevin Samuels and Odin are poking holes in their delusion, and they can't take it. They can't. And so you'll hear things like, he'll say, well, ma'am, you know, the number of men that make more than, he'll say, well, what percentage of men do you think makes more than $250,000 a year? And the one I heard on the way into work, she said, oh, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, 40%, 50%, something like that. What? Yeah, somewhere 30, 40% men in the country make more than $250,000 a year. 1%. 1%. Right? That guy has all of these options. What makes you think he's going to choose you? And then he really says, let me ask you this. You say you have children? Yes. You have a son? Yes. So if your son came home to you 20 years from now after working his tail off and said, Mom, I found the woman of my dreams. She's 38 years old. She's got 3 kids. And she's got a couple $100,000 income. And I love her, and this is the woman I'm looking for. He says to the women who are pushing this delusion, would that make you happy if your son came home with that? And they all kind of say no. So what do you want to say? There is. I was watching a lot. This is how I found Kevin Samuels. I was watching a lot of. I don't. It's very much like Andrew Tate. I don't watch Andrew Tate. I got nothing against Andrew Tate. I just don't like him. There's something about him that is rubbing the wrong way. I don't buy that whole kind of look at me in a private jet with my 17 cars stuff. I just find him a little irritating. But he is doing the same thing, and there's a number of people out there like that. Young men. There's Pearl. Pearly Things, this young, I don't know, late 20s, early 30s white woman who's basically talking to women and telling them the truth. And then there's this one guy who's also very calm and just constantly just poking them, popping that bubble. And you watch their faces and they're just like stunned. They're stunned. The younger guys will say, well, how do you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? There'll be like 7, 8 women there. And they'll all go, I'm a 9. I'm a 10. She's not a 7. She's not a 4 even. They're so convinced that they are special. They're so convinced that they are absolutely unique. And when you drill down to the bottom of all of these, Pearl is fantastic. When you drill down to the bottom of this, what you find among all of these people, the transsexual activists and these young women who all think that they're 10s, plus these older women who think that they're going to get a $200,000, $300,000 a year man who's got nothing else to do but marry a woman who's 5'3", 180 pounds, 2 kids, 39 years old. They really believe it. They really believe it. And when he tells them no, they will go to the most ridiculous extremes. And that's the thing I like the most about watching it, is watching. It's not even watching these women squirm. They're not squirming. They are arguing with him for a half hour about how he's wrong. And they will say things. He'll say something like, yeah, it's 1% of the men make more than $250,000. Heard this earlier today. And this one woman says, how do you know that? Where do you get your statistics from? He says, I get the statistics from the Department of Labor. I get them from CDC. I get them from these are official statistics put up by the U.S. government. And this woman says, yeah, well, a lot of people don't answer the census, And now I'm doing what he does, which is like just kind of stopping. It's like, first of all, to say that number's wrong because not a lot of people answer the census is pretty creative. Secondly, if there's going to be people that don't answer the census taker, it's going to be people at the bottom of the economic scale, not the top. So actually, to the degree that people don't answer the census, that actually makes the numbers worse, right? If you live in the kind of house that you would live in if you made $300,000 a year, you're not going to pretend that you don't live there. And the absolute impermeability of them, that's what it comes down to. He keeps hitting them with the same thing, with their own words, again and again and again, and they will not believe it. They will not. I haven't seen one person, not one. I've seen some of them get kind of quiet, but I've not seen one person ever say, you know what? I hadn't I hadn't thought about that. That just never occurred to me. You're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. You talked to this one woman earlier on the show I saw earlier today. Same kind of woman, average looking, overweight, who has a she comes on and she says, "So anyway, Kevin, I'm a boss bitch. I run my own company. Don't need no man. I'm independent. I'm strong and stunning and brave." And he says, "Okay." He says, "What do you want? Do you want to get married?" "Yes, I want to get married." "Do you want to have kids?" "Yes, I want to have kids." "Okay. Well, if you she's got a little private rent-a-car company. She bought some cars and she rents them." He said, "So what happens when you find your dream man? Do you want to keep working?" She, "No." "Then why is it that everything that you're coming at me with are business things, male things? I got my own business. I make this much money. I do this and this. You're not coming at me like a woman. You're not coming at anybody like a woman. You're coming at it, with a lot of masculinity." Sometimes they just say, "Look, just put your dick away." And they can't cope with it. Every now and then you'll get one where he's talking. This is Kevin Samuels, for those of you coming in late. Um, when when they when he tells them, because they all follow the same formula, but it's just seeing the different kind of delusions. He When he's got them using their own words, he says, "You say you want to be married, and you say you want to have kids, and you say you want to do that by the time you're 30, and you say that you're 27. So how long are you going to date this guy before you get married? At least a year. Okay, so that means that you've got 6 months, 4 months, 5 months to find this guy, date him for a year, marry him, and have kids. And you're average, ma'am. You're average. There's nothing wrong with being average, but this disdain that these women have for average, right? Oh, and a couple of other things I learned. The number, I don't know what the divorce rate in America is now. It's greater than 50%. It might be around 60%. Total marriages end up in divorce. Of the divorces in this country, 80% of them are the women leaving the men. And among college educated women, it's 91% of all the divorces are the women leaving the men. And they leave the men because they're convinced they can do better. And time and time and time and time again, these women are coming in saying, how do I get a high value man? I want a guy who's making at least $300,000. He's got to be 6 foot tall. He's got to be doing this and so on and so forth. He says, those people are 1% of the population, man. They have their pick of anybody. Why would they pick you? Not forget about the fact that you're 38 and have 2 kids and you're overweight and you're average looking. You're combative and you're nasty and you're disagreeable and you're showing all this masculine energy. Why wouldn't he go with the 24-year-old who's completely smitten and who will provide him with a family? And Aesop said the latest video from Kevin Samuels is 5 hours ago. I don't know who's posting him, but it's not him. And they will not believe it. What do you think a man is looking for? Personality. They're looking for somebody, somebody who can build a life with together. And you're talking about a man's making $300,000 a year, ma'am. He's already built his life. He doesn't need your help, and he doesn't need your money. It doesn't matter to us. It doesn't matter. And I'm talking. Time was telling us, I still don't know who I'm talking about. It's a latest guy I've found called Kenneth Samuels. He keeled over and died about a year ago. But I'm also talking about a bunch of younger men who are talking about this is the death of feminism. I'm watching it happen in front of my eyes. I'm watching it happening in front of my eyes. I've spent the last half hour talking about Kevin Samuels and his one-on-ones with older women. Kevin Samuels, right? And now let's go back to the other guys I told you about, the guys that are they're younger and they are, what's the name? Andrew Tate, did I get that right? Who I don't like. So these are variations on this, right? Young guys who are sitting around with this 7 women, and now we're talking about much younger women, talking about women in their early to mid 20s, and they will ask them, "What do you rate yourself?" And they'll all say nines or tens. I'm a 9. I'm a 10. And they'll look at them just like, "What? I'm a 10. You're a 10. Yeah." Kevin Samuels had one woman say, "I'm a 10." He said, she's on a good day, she's a 6. He said, "You're a 10? You really believe that?" She goes, "Yeah." He says, "Ma'am, if you're a 10, that's top of the scale. That means there's nobody in the country, in the world, better looking than you are." She goes, "Yeah, that's me. I'm a 10." And they have been so sold on this delusion, and that this is what you deserve. That's basically it. This is what you deserve. You deserve to be a boss bitch at work, make $400,000 a year, and then abandon all of that for a man who makes $500,000 a year, have all these kids with him, and you get to do it when you're 38. And yeah, the Fresh and Fit guys, those are the guys I'm talking about, Steve B. They have a show called Fresh and Fit. They're just poking holes and you're beginning to see on a political scale now. So I've been talking a lot about the pop culture, but this isn't pop culture. This is where wokeism and progressivism is hitting the wall of reality, and it's beginning to dawn on them, because these young women now, let's talk about their problem. The problem with the young women, the older women are not, they're not hoeing around on the streets, right? They're relatively professional, and many of them haven't dated in months or whatever, right? But now let's talk about young women. The young women issue is this. They've been told about all of the sexual liberation, and that it's that in order to be a woman now in America, you're not only allowed to be sexually promiscuous, you're expected to be. So what he finds is you'll find these women, and they're saying, "What's your body count?" For those of you who are a little slow on the pop culture thing, as I was, took me a second or two. When people talk about their body count, that means how many people have you slept with? And you've got these 23, 24-year-old average-looking women. What's your body count? And it's like, I don't know, 35. How old are you, ma'am? 22. The current slang expression is that they've been run through. A bunch of guys have run through them. So now you've got these young women, and they don't know why men aren't asking them out. Right? No one's asking them out. None of them are going on dates. They're all these women are saying, nobody, sad wings raging, let the bodies hit the floor. So all of them are stumped as to why they can't have steady boyfriends. Not that they can't get dates. They're all getting dates. They're just getting laid 7, 8, 10 times a week by different people. They're not having a problem finding sex. They're having a problem keeping the people that they actually like. Cody Fett with a super chat says, Andrew Tate was arrested in Romania on sex trafficking charges a few weeks ago. Leaks from the police seem to show him in intercepted messages quite clearly being a slaver. That may be. It may entirely be. I'm not arguing with you, Cody. He may be innocent too. I don't know. I don't much really care because I'm not a fan of his at all. But I am a big fan of this message. And folks, one of the things that whatever value I have is that I sample a lot of data, and I get it from a lot of different places. So I'm not just looking at politics. I'm looking at movies and everything else. So when I tell you that this is a wave that's coming ashore, I'm just telling you what I see from the top of the lighthouse here. This whole philosophy of progressivism is really rapidly now, and I mean rapidly like in the last several months, it's starting to unravel. It's starting to come apart at the seams because it is doing the only thing that it could not handle, and that is contact with reality. When you own all of the information outlets, when you own all of the emotional outlets, and you tell men and women, men ain't shit. That's the expression. That's what most young women believe. When you ask them, why haven't you found a boyfriend, or are you alone? Yes, why? Because men ain't shit. That's why. Again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And They don't know what to do, but they do know that they're lonely. That they know. And I'm seeing, as opposed to the Kevin Samuels thing, there's a lot of videos of women who are much younger, late 20s, early 30s, and they're saying, and they're crying because TikTok is a diary, right? TikTok is you talking to your diary where you get likes and thumbs up and people tell you, no, no, you're stunning and brave. So the left has created this ideal that is antithetical to biology. It's not just not following biology, it's antithetical to biology. And these young women cannot understand why they would go out on a date with a guy and in the course of that date tell them that they've slept with 25 different guys this year. And they don't know why it turns the guys off. They don't know why they're getting ghosted. Again, for those of you not up on the hipster scene, ghosted is when they all communicate through texts and direct messaging. He's all up in my DMs, right? So they just text each other, message each other. They don't talk to each other, not even on the phone. And so they will get a date on Tinder or something like that. They'll both swipe right, and then they'll go out. They'll hit it a couple times, and then the woman who's starting to get attached to this particular guy among the 30 she slept with this year is wondering why he suddenly ghosts her. He disappears, no answer. She texts him, ping, nothing back, right? Nothing. Just he's gone. And they can't figure it out. They cannot figure it out. And they don't understand it, but it is beginning to sink in on them that something is very, very, very wrong. Very, very wrong. And men, on the other hand, and again, this is new. I've been watching this stuff out of my peripheral vision for a decade now. This is really new. Men who have been so badly beaten up and so badly demonized, a year ago, I would have said, 6 months ago, I would have said, all the men are just completely smashed and they have no, they're just keeping their heads down because they're told that they're all rapists. And if you're a white male, then you're a white male, straight white male, then you are the worst kind of oppressor, blah, 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 blah. And all across the board now, what I'm seeing is these men are just basically standing up and they're just saying, we don't need you at all. We don't. If you want to make it so that all I have to do is hit you up with a text at 3:00 in the morning on Tuesday, I can come over there and get laid and then leave. That's in my favor, not in your favor. This is swell with me. We're not going to, MGTOW, MGTOW, men going their own way. What the young men are basically saying is, we're not going to waste any more of our time interacting with you nasty, mean, narcissistic, antagonistic bitches. We're not going to waste our time. I'm going to hang out with the bros, and then I'm going to hit up one of the 17 people I've got on my phone, and that's what we'll do. And now the women don't understand it. And when you tell them, well, no, you've slept with 50 guys. You're 23. We're done. We don't want you ever. It's not like you're going to grow out of it. This is something that Kenneth deals with too. All these women have made all these decisions, and they're in these kind of romantic dead ends. And he said, well, why didn't you marry the father of your two kids? Or why did you leave him? I was young. I was just really young and stupid. And Kevin says, that's not a get out of jail free card. I know you think it is. All women think it is. You made all these bad decisions and you think, well, I was young and stupid. And so poof, all the consequences go away. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. 570 Riviera says, is that why a lot of men are going overseas for love? Yes. Passport bros, they're called. They're just picking up and leaving the country. They're going to Thailand or the Philippines or Europe, Eastern Europe, because Western Europe's just as bad, and they're finding women who are perfectly okay with being women. And it's not lost on me that I was in the dating scene here in Los Angeles, and 10 years ago I was saying, what's it like dating in Los Angeles, Bill? Well, it's simple. The men are weak and the women are crazy. And the crazy women make the men weaker, and the weak men make the women crazier. And that's what the dating pool is out there. And when I met my wife from Russia, she's a feminine woman. And she's not constantly giving me lip about everything and arguing about everything, right? and and she was just feminine and warm and just there. And when I see what's happening to these young women, and they get more and more angry, they're more and more enraged. Man, it's all men's fault, men's fault, men's fault, men's fault. And I was really worrying about this effect on men. But lately, I just see these passport bros, and they're like, bitch ahead, go ahead, just bitch on. I don't care. I'm not listening. It's like a buzzing in my ears. I'm going to hang out with the guys. We're going to play some video games. Then at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'll get out the Tinder or whatever and swipe right. And half an hour later, I'll be at somebody's house. Her body count will go up. Fantastic. And they cannot understand, these women cannot understand at whatever age. Aesop says, careful, Bill, she's a good shot. Natasha's a crazy, crazy good shot. I used to talk about my Russian wife, but I don't have a Russian wife. I have an American wife, which we're both very proud of. And they can't understand it. And the thing is that I think it's beginning to dawn on young women, Gen Z women. It's beginning to dawn on them, first of all, that they've been lied to. And secondly, and more importantly, that this is not reversible. It's not reversible. If you're fooling around in your 20s and you get to be 28, 29, and you decide you want to get married, and a guy asks you about body count, and you say 150, he's out of there. And he should be out of there. Because what that says is, you are not capable of holding a relationship. And not only that, there is a very, very, very strong statistical correlation between the number of partners that women have had before they get married versus the divorce rate. The more people that you've been with prior to getting married for women, probably true for men too, but it's rock solid for women. The more men that you've been with as a woman, the more likely you are to get divorced. And as I said earlier, 80% of the divorces in America are instigated by women, and 91% of them are instigated if it's college-educated women. So what happens is these women have slept with 100 guys before they get married. And after 6 months or something, they get a little bored, or maybe things are getting a little rough, and it's a little bit of a rough patch, and maybe we're not living this pink cloud romantic thing that I thought, so they just get up and leave. And every time they get up and leave, it makes the men more like, this is another thing all of these guys are talking about. And Pearl too was probably the best at it. We're at a point now where people are saying, what do men get out of marriage? What on earth do they get? You're going to get a woman who's been completely run through, who at any moment, could just decide to get up, call her attorney, and leave. And not only leave with your heart, but leave with half of your money and your kids. And if you get married again and she leaves, now there's a quarter of your money left. Men are looking at this, and it's like, this is like, you used to be able to go up if a kid was hurt, at a playground. You could pick the kid up, Now, don't even want to go near him, because if I touch this kid, there's a good chance I'm going to end up in jail because of my, because I have to list myself as a sexual predator. This is the world that they've made for us, for themselves, not for us. We don't have to live in their world, but they do, and they don't like it. The freedom of speech thing never bothered them. They're all of these young women especially are all into big government. They're all into the government writing their checks, and they all depend on daddy, who's the federal government, and they don't need no man if they've got alimony checks and all the rest of it. But from a male point of view, it's like, this is insane. This is insane. There's no commitment. And even now, you're starting to hear women like Pearl, who's really good, and some others too, women saying to women, what do men get out of this? We're not loyal. We're not chaste. We're not reliable. We're antagonistic. We say that they're all shit, and we say this every day, men ain't shit, and so on. And that's our attitude towards them. And if they decide to marry us, we can just get up and leave, take half of their stuff. Why on earth would they marry us? Why? There's no reason. There's nothing in it for them, nothing. And that little dim 20-watt bulb in the back of their head starting to light up, right? Starting to light up just a little bit. A couple of quick super chats here from Lapco 92. Trouble is, when they realize something's wrong, it must be the men's fault. She doesn't need to change a thing. She's perfect. Yes, that's exactly right. She's been told men are garbage, and she's been told she's a perfect princess, and she's been told you can have whatever you want, and she's been told that any attempt to limit what you want is just the patriarchy keeping you down. And G.K. Masterson here says, I wonder how long it will take before one can understand the reason Paradise by the Dashboard Light is hilarious. That's a great point, because that is a brilliant song. Everybody knows Paradise by the Dashboard Light by Meatloaf. I was a high school junior or senior when Bat Out of Hell came out, and we're coming out of a time when You Light Up My Life is the number one rock and roll song in the country. Rock and roll song, top of the rock pop charts, right? And Fly Robin Fly and Rock the Boat. So all of a sudden, here comes Meatloaf. I say, what the hell is this guy? Where did he come from? He's incredible. He's incredible. Yeah, but Paradise by the Dashboard Light is all about. In fact, what's interesting about Paradise by the Dashboard Light is that, well, obviously, if you don't know the song, it's a story about a guy and a girl who are in a car, and the guy wants to get laid now, and the girl's fighting him back, and she's basically saying, "Will you love me forever?" And he says, "Let me think about it. Let me sleep on it. I'll tell you tomorrow. Right now, let's get it on, but tomorrow I'll tell you about whether I love you forever or not." And it's just this back and forth war, Let me sleep on it. Will you love me forever? Let me sleep on it. Will you love me forever? And then, of course, the genius of that song is they get, I think it's Vin Scully, to do a play-by-play call like it's on the radio. And it's like, oh, he's in, because, you got the first base with a girl, second base with a girl, third base. He does the whole thing like, oh, my God, he's turning, he's stealing home. He's going for home plate. He's going to slide. I think he's going to make it. It's a brilliant song. But it's a song about a guy having to spend hours and hours and hours to convince this woman to have premarital sex with him in the car. But more importantly, is the ending of the song. That's really where the heart of the whole song is, because she wants him to love her till the end of time. She wants him to promise that he's going to love her till the end of time. And then he's, I couldn't take it any longer. Lord, I was crazy, and the feeling came upon me like a tidal wave. Started swearing on my life and on my mother's grave that I would love you to the end of time. I swore I would love you to the end of time. So he makes the deal, right? I'll love you forever. Here's your free sex in the car. And then there's this gigantic key change. It's like, so now he says, and now I'm praying for the end of time. So hurry up, man alive, because if I had to spend another minute with you, I don't think that I could really survive. I'll never break my promise or forget my vow, but God only knows what I will do right now. I'm praying for the end of time. It's all that I can do. Praying for the end of time so I can end my time with you. So that whole song is about a guy who is trying to talk a girl into premarital sex and succeeds. But the most important part of the song is he keeps his word, right? He makes this deal. The whole Paradise by the Dashboard Light song is him trying to talk this woman into premarital sex. He finally agrees. He just gets so out of control, horny, and he just finally says, yes, I love you for the end of time. I promise I'll never leave you. So they do it in the back of the car. And then instead of him just bucking off, ghosting her, he says, well, now I just got to wait till I die because I promised I'd be here. I'm going to keep my promise. And I can't stand you. I just hate you. I can't stand anything about you. But I said I'm going to stay, so I'm going to stay. And that's why Paradise by the Dashboard Light is the antithesis for those new raiders here that just came. We've been talking about the relationship between men and women, how feminism has fallen apart real fast. We're talking about Kevin Samuels, who deals with older women, and then a bunch of these guys who are talking to younger women. And these young women can't understand why they cannot keep a boyfriend. And they've got a body count of 50 at age 20, 23, 24. And here's something else that's interesting about the younger women. Not so much the older ones, because they've already abandoned this path. But when you see these guys, was it Fit and Fresh or whatever that panel was? When you see the young men talking to the young women, and Pearl does this too, and a bunch of people, but basically they say, So you can't stand the guys that you're going out with. No, why not? Because they're all a bunch of lying, cheating bastards. Really? Yep. They're lying, cheating bastards. Every one of them. How come I can't find any good men? Why can't I find a good man who'll be loyal to me? And what they'll say to them is, oh, you've got at least five good men that you can call right now who you've known for years, right? You've known them for years, and they will treat you well, and they will respect you, and they'll take care of you, and they'll stay with you forever. Unfortunately for them and for you, they're in the friend zone. Oh yeah, yeah. So what would you rather have? They'll ask women on the street, young women on the street, outright. Would you rather have a guy who treats you well, is loyal to you, and takes care of you, or would you rather have the bad boy? And they all say, oh, the bad boy, definitely. The other guy's just boring. So they think this is what they think. They think that they can have as high a body count as they want, and that they will soon run into the guy who is the one who is bad boy enough to keep them excited, but also is that one in a million bad boy who's not only a bad boy, but can be tamed. This is the great female fantasy. This is all of it. Thank you very much, Patricia, for that super chat. Just a donation. I appreciate it. They all think, I've seen this before. I saw this before I got married. I saw it a lot. Women have been told for 3 generations now. I understand why women are attracted to the bad boys. I understand, especially pretty women. Good-looking women are good-looking women have had their butts kissed their entire life, right? I mean, everybody's fallen down at their feet. So when somebody doesn't, they're completely obsessed. There's lots of little YouTube sketches and things where you get these young women and they're saying, what about this guy? He's what about this guy? It's like a dating service thing I saw that was, this guy's this and this, and here's a guy who's, what you said, he's making the money you said, he's a little bit older, and here's, you know what, forget this guy, he's not interested in dating you. Here's another guy that this, and she's, wait, whoa. What about the guy you just mentioned? No, he said he's not interested in people your age group or whatever, so I just accidentally hit him, he's off the table. Anyway, on to the next. No. Tell me about that guy who wants nothing to do with me. He said he's not interested in people like you. What is it about me he doesn't like? And they can't get over it. They can't get over it. And so, like the trans people, unlike another one of my favorite channels I've talked about for a month or two now, The Offensive Tranny, who is a transsexual man, a person born of a female who's living her life as a man, and I call him a he because he looks like not like a gay he. In fact, that's what's interesting too, by the way. Unlike the trans activists, which are men, is a new term I've heard recently. I love it. These trans activists, they call them men in woman face, like blackface. They're just men in women face. But this particular guy, the offensive tranny, says that, well, the reason I started listening to the stuff was because the first thing I heard him say was, look, I'm a transsexual male, but I was born female. I am a female. I am biologically a female. That can't change. There's nothing that can change about that. It's just the way it is. I am trying to pass as a male because I have a mental illness called gender dysphoria. And I thought, well, that actually sounds like a sane person. Yes. So those people are all right. What I've learned from this offensive tranny channel is that actual transsexuals are pretty much unrecognizable, and at least to the credit of this one particular person, this former girl who's now a guy says, I couldn't forget, men's bathrooms, women's bathrooms. I didn't go to any public bathrooms for 3 years because I wasn't comfortable going into the men's bathroom until I was convinced that nobody would notice. Right? It's not a guy with a beard and mascara going into the women's locker room. It's completely different. This person, this offensive tranny person, seems like he is very happy. Really seems happy. So that person's not in a dead end. But think about somebody like Dylan Mulvaney, right? Or this Jeffrey guy. If you know anybody about the guy Jeffrey that I'm talking about, if you're into this whole transsexual movement as a political thing, Dylan Mulvaney is a very slightly built gay man who is started this day one of being a girl, and he's making $500,000 a month. He was invited to the White House to talk to Joe Biden about trans health care. So this is a young man, a gay young man, who decides he wants to be a woman. And he dresses up, and he's a cartoon of a woman. He's a caricature of a woman. But put that aside for a minute. Thank you very much. Apple Kiss says, 246 says, I guess the previous 245 Apple Kisses were taken. Thank you for covering this topic. If very pertinent towards men and women, I'm sorry. This is very pertinent men and women like me to hear. Okay, so stay with me on this. So you've got guys like Dylan. They're born male. They claim that they have transitioned to female, and this is going to go back to the whole arguing you into the insanity kind of thing. But what is the end result? What is the end game for them? Here's why progressivism is falling apart. Here's why woke is starting to dissolve. This is the whole reason I'm talking about this long. Because it's happening everywhere. I'm seeing it everywhere. What's happening is these people have been told if you want something, you will get it. All you have to do is want it enough, make enough of a temper tantrum, stomp your feet, whatever. If you want something, you will get it. And why wouldn't they think that? Because they've never been told no in their lives. These are the kids that would have a temper tantrum and start wriggling around on the floor at Walmart or Target until their parents bought them a toy, and then they got the toy and they immediately corrected themselves. Everything they've ever wanted has been given to them if they just complained loud enough. So now you've got a whole generation, a whole cohort of people that have been raised like this. Two entire cohorts now of people that have been raised to believe if you want it, it's yours. So what the trans activists are, put aside all of you need to learn my pronouns, put all that garbage away for a second. What is the outcome that they want? Well, it's clear, and it's clear from what they say. Biological males believe that if they have the top surgery and the bottom surgery and take all of these hormone suppressions for testosterone and take estrogen, they believe that they have magically become women. That's a magical thinking belief, but much more perfectly, these men who have lopped off their male parts and had female parts constructed for them by plastic surgeons, and you don't want to get into the details about this because it is freaking horrible, and this is one of the things JT talks a lot about, probably what got him practically pulled off of YouTube. But once that has happened, it's not before it happens because they don't think this far ahead. Once it's happened, now you've got these biological males who are transsexual females, and they don't only want, they demand that straight males will date them and marry them as women. And if they don't, it's because they're transphobes and bigots. We all clear on this? They actually genuinely believe that straight males are going to go for trans females, and that if they complain enough and call them homophobic or transphobic enough, then they will back down like everybody else has ever backed down in their lives and agree to marry and date them. That's what they think is going to happen. It's not going to happen. This is something JT talks about. So everybody's covering different aspects of this entire mass psychosis, right? They believe it. And when they So look, this whole trans thing is like everything else in life. Life is a bell curve. You just write that down. Life is a bell curve, especially anything having to do with behavior. So you know how a bell curve works, right? Start with very few, and then you get the whole giant thing, and then there's very few on the tail end. So what we're seeing now with this trans movement is we're seeing the head of the bell curve, where more and more kids are convinced that this is the thing to do because they're unhappy. So they've been told that all you have to do is transition, you'll be happy, you live a life like a girl, and you can just jump around, and all your problems will go away. So they believe it, and so they do it. And then once they've had their reproductive organs removed, they make the transition, and what's happening more and more now is they go through a couple-month period of euphoria where JT is a retired Marine who has a channel called Odin's Men, where he basically just looks at TikTok videos and takes them apart, as a retired Marine would. So what? So they bought so deeply into this delusion that they actually have the surgeries, and when they've had the surgeries, they go through a 2 or 3 month period of elation because they're getting all this attention. They're stunning and brave, in JT's words, stunning and brave, and good for you. My God, the courage. My God, the courage. The courage. The courage. The courage. Now you're a woman. Everything's going to be fine. Well, everything's not fine. And not only is it not fine, they're not. I know this seems crazy, and the reason it sounds crazy is because it's crazy. It is genuinely mentally insane. But they actually, honestly, genuinely believe, yes, hour and a half ago, I said I didn't have much to say before we get started. They honestly believe that if they have the transition, then straight males, or straight females, as the case may be, will treat them like any other woman. And some of them haven't even had the surgeries, right? They think that if they come out as trans women, then they become women, and men will date them even if they still have their Johnson, as JT would say. They believe this. Well, so you've got that trans cohort. You've got the young women who don't understand why they can't have boyfriends, why nobody wants to date them because they got a body count of 150. And then you've got the older women with Kevin Samuels, God rest his soul, who are running into the fact that I was told I could be, all I had to do was make a lot of money and have my own job and be an independent woman. And that once I'm an independent woman, everything's copacetic. Now I want a guy who makes $300,000 a year, and on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm a 10. Only you're not a 10, you're a 4 or 5 or a 6. So all across the board, I'm seeing it, and it's like any other bell curve. I'm watching this thing start to grow exponentially, where it's like started to see some of this 6, 7, 8 months ago, maybe a little bit further, but now it's like almost like on a daily basis, this stuff is starting to rise. It's starting to really rise, and this has been my position from the beginning. I said certainly before the 2020 election, but practically on a daily basis after that, is that the only way you can cure people of socialism is to give it to them. And the only way you can cure people of these delusions of theirs is to give it to them. Right? You've been told this, you believe it? Yep, it's 100% true. I can, at age 38 with 3 kids, I'm 5'5", I weigh 180 pounds, I'm a 5 or a 6, but I will land the 1% of men that make more than $300,000 a year because I'm special, because of my personality, because of all the things I bring to the table. What do you bring to the table? One woman was asked, what do you bring to the table? Kevin asked her, well, what are you bringing to this guy who can have his pick of any woman in the world? Well, I've been really working on myself, and I've got a great personality, and I like to plant things. I can garden. I like to plant things. Okay, what else? I plant things. And he says, ma'am, I don't think that's going to do it. Most guys making 300 grand or more pretty much go to the grocery store or have somebody else go to the grocery store for them. And when all 3 of these people, you don't get the reaction from a JT on Odin's Bend because he's dealing with a recorded TikTok, but on the young guy panel and on Pearl stuff, and then on Kevin Samuels stuff, you can see that light starting to go off, just slowly starting to go on, rather. Like, is that it? No, it can't be. It can't be. Then they'll start to argue. Well, the numbers are wrong or this. And most of them eventually say, well, the reason that an average-looking woman who's 30 pounds overweight, 38 years old, with 3 kids, can land a man making $300,000 a year who wants to start a family, the reason I can do it is because I'm special. Yes, I'll grant you that all of your statistics say that this is essentially impossible, but I am special. My personality is so unique, and I'm so wonderful that I will be the person who will beat the odds. And if you listen to the progressives, especially the super overripe batch of the woke, woke, woke. It all comes down to arguing the exceptions. When you when these people say that I'm non-binary, and people say no, there are only two biological sexes. They'll say no, science says no. Science says no. For instance, here's a case of this person who was born with whatever, like a hermaphrodite or something. And the fact that that might be 1 in 20 million, and they themselves are 1/10 of 1% of the population, or 1% of 1% of the population, they don't care. If there's one example of it happening, as far as they're concerned, it's a 50-50 chance. And and they believe it. And what is curing them of the left wing politics has got nothing to do with what we're doing or what politics are doing. The only thing that is curing them is spending years at home by themselves with their dog crying at night alone in their apartments. That's the only thing that's getting through to them. And it's getting through to them. It's really all across the board, really beginning to get through to all of them that this is a lie. And they are beginning to slowly wake up, not because their intellect got turned on, not because they suddenly heard an argument that made sense to them, because it's impenetrable. They will argue and argue and argue. And that's another thing about these women, these young women, and all the women, all of them, is the one thing that all of them have in common is none of them can ever admit they're wrong. They will always admit that they're right, and they will go as far off into the woods in terms of exceptions to prove that they're right. And furthermore, virtually any time you ask them a question, they will answer with another question if they don't like the answer. So they are convinced that they can talk people into what they believe, and it's not working. Sound died? How's that possible? Is it gone still? I didn't touch anything. YouTube, can you hear me? Okay. Hang on. I just got to put it in Twitch. Hang on a second. Okay. See, it's not me. It's not me. It's Gremlins. So our Twitch, it's not my internet. It's Twitch. The sound went away with Twitch, and they got me on YouTube. So hopefully if you refresh on Twitch, people on Twitch are saying, can't hear you. I'm putting it in caps because I have to shout. Anyway, there's not much I can do about that, but the fact that YouTube hears me. All right, hang on. 1 second, gang. 1 second, gang. Just 1 second, please. I'm going to copy just for our friends on Twitch who have been suddenly muted. So everybody over in the Twitch stream is freaking out and panicking because the sound went out on Twitch. Probably just a raw coincidence. We've noticed this before, by the way, that whenever we start getting deep into issues that seem to matter, all of a sudden we get interrupted on the live stream and all the rest of it and so on. So yeah, exactly right. Blank Frankie says that's a great handle, by the way. Twitch cut the audio for wrong thing. Yeah, I was saying things that were double plus on good. Good. We got them. These shows are getting bigger. We have 300 and some people here. That's a nice number for me. I'm glad to see you all. If you hit the like button, we'll get more people next time, so that'd be great. So anyway, back to just kind of wrap this thing up. We'll take some questions. Like I said, one of the things that is relatively unique about me is I have a wide sensor net. I think I could make a pretty compelling case that my sensor net is wider than anybody else, in at least that I can think of. Right? I'm right in the middle of the whole political argument. I understand the science, and I'm also watching pop culture channels, and I'm watching things like this. I'm watching a lot of stuff. And what I'm seeing from all of my sensors all across the board is that something big is happening. And it's happening because they cannot continue to talk themselves into thinking that it's going to be okay. It's beginning to dawn on them it's not going to be okay, and that they've been lied to, and that they're going to have to change, or else they're just going to be like this forever. Um, Michael Utley says, "I'll buy you a Tennessee Volunteer pullover if you wear it. It won't help your eternal soul, but you won't look like a chump." Nice. Thank you for the thought. If I put a Tennessee Volunteers pullover on top of me, my skin would catch fire, and I would disappear into a smoking hole in the ground, and sulfur clouds would come up, and I'd join the rest of the volunteers. Uh, uh, yeah, that's funny. That's great. Um, Nylon Song says, "I don't know, Bill. I don't see any cracks in the religion. I do. I do. And hopefully that's why you're listening to the show. And I'm not seeing it. It's not a one off, and it's not a temporary thing, and it's not a passing thing. It is bell curve happening all across the board. And and the pop culture led this phenomenon by 2 or 3 years, which is what we've been claiming the whole time. Politics is downstream of culture, and the culture was rejecting this stuff 3, 4 years ago. That's why I was doing nothing but talking about Doomcock and all those guys back then. And I still love the guys, but it's moved past that now. It's not about uh, what the pop culture is saying. People are not voting with their feet, not going to movies. Now it's really starting to hit much larger than that. So, anyway, they all think they can talk us into their delusions, and we're not being talked into it. We're keeping our heads down. We're not saying anything. And the men are going their own way. They're walking away. Okay, see you later. Um, Rob Ross with the super chat says, can Thursdays be something big is happening with Bill Whittle? Love the social commentary stuff. Thank you. Yeah, let's do that. Maybe let's do that. I definitely want to do something. I'm almost done with this thing that's been sitting on my back for 5 months now. And so now Jim Killian says, I'll believe it when people stop voting for Dems. Look, Jim, I'm with you. We are a long way away from that, right? A long way away from that. And yes, the midterms were depressing, and so were the 2020 elections. Yes, I agree. You can have all of these giant social changes on the board, and if they keep voting the way they keep voting, then that's one thing. But here's what I would say is good news, and this is why I'm so excited about this stuff. There are many steps left to go, but the steps have to happen in this order. In other words, the pop culture has to show that there's a problem first, because the pop culture has a much faster response rate. You get to vote on whether you like a TV show every single day. Your box office, if you go to see a movie, then you go to see a movie. If you don't, you don't. That information is available within 4 or 5 days. If a movie is extremely woke and costs a fortune and it bombs, that's social data. And we get that social data very quickly. Now, the ability of the left to hit the wall is something that follows that and is starting to happen now, and it's going to continue to accelerate. And that's the next step, is people have to be miserable enough to at least question this impenetrable delusion that they've been sold and grown up with their entire lives. No amount of talking to them is going to do it. That's what's so fun about watching them on all these shows and watching them with Kevin and all the rest of them. It's fun. That's why they get the views. It's fun to watch people doing the contortions that they have to do in order to maintain the delusion. That's what makes it entertaining. That's why I watch it. I know all the stuff he's talking about. I know he's right. But I like watching people. I like watching the desperation that people have in order to maintain the delusion. So yes. So first, the pop culture will show that people don't want left-wing woke politics. Done. Disney loses $4 billion. That's not a bad hit over the course of a year. Lose $4 billion because of your content, right? Okay. Star Wars is dead. Star Trek is dead. All that. I've been talking about this for 3, 4 years now at least. So that has happened. Downstream of that now, people are now beginning to be confronted with the emotional consequences of their emotional decisions. They vote their emotions. And now, the result of having voting their emotions is misery. And it's increasing. And the people who it's hitting the most, by far. In fact, you can make a case. You can make a case because that the only people that are really hurting on this particular subject out there now are single women, which is both logical and wonderful. It's logical because single women are the by far the sudden Twitch is back. Single women are by far the single greatest left-wing demographic. And the reason that single women are voting Democrat is because of all the social welfare programs and things like the alimony that we talked about before, right? Uncle Sam said, they were told you don't need a man. Okay, so now you got social programs, you got all these other things you want for free, and then if you marry somebody and you don't like, you have a bad week or something, you divorce him, you take half his money. All of this stuff favors women, but it doesn't make them happy, and it's starting to come home all across the spectrum. Black women, white women, various ages, they are all rapidly, and this thing is coming up fast. It is a bell curve. We're starting to see an exponential growth on the number of videos that are out there dealing with this issue. They're miserable, and they're so miserable, been so miserable for so long that they're actually at the point now where they're actually starting to question this stuff. They're still not listening. It's fun to watch them not listen, but they're at least no longer content with the delusion because the delusion is not working for them. So you're right about the comment about they still vote for the left, and they will continue to for a while until they change their behaviors in their personal life. What that means is for single women who are now panicking, young and old, panicking because they're alone, they will continue to be lonely until they do something different. And when they do something different, like behave according to the biological, what's the word I want to look for? Attractors to behavior, right? Men and women are wired to behave differently. And once again, you say, well, there aren't very many women in engineering. Well, I know this woman who's engineering, so it should be 50-50. Jordan Peterson's very good at this, right? He says, you have a completely free society. You can be whatever you want to. 90% of bricklayers are males and 90% of nurses are females. Why is that? It's because of biology. So they've been told that not only does biology not count, they've been told that the opposite of biology is not only possible but desirable. So now you have 2 or 3 generations of women, they're not young anymore, many of them, whose defining characteristic, when you ask them, if you really get down to it, what is it about you that makes you a woman, you will find that the one thing that all of these young left women agree on is the one thing we can all admit that makes us actual women is our willingness to have our children aborted. That's the one thing that we can all agree on makes us women. That's what the Democrats have done. That's what the left has done. The definition of a woman now is that you must fight to the death for your right to kill your unborn children. Whatever you think about abortion, and I know where most people in this audience are on the side on this, and I know there's some other people on the other side of this too. That's fine to disagree about it, but nevertheless, that is the defining characteristic now of what makes women women, is you've got to be out there ready to go on the streets and burn things down and smash things with bats like men in order to preserve your right to kill your children. That's what the left has provided us with. Now, looking at this thing going forward, what does that mean? What's going to happen next? It's going to get worse before it gets better because of the bell curve, right? More and more and more people are going to start hitting this wall, but then something's going to happen. Once we're already seeing it with the head of the bell curve, the people that are calling in on these shows, the women that are showing up on these shows, and calling in on things like Kevin and appearing on the panels. Those people are doing it because they are so alarmed at how awful their life is. They are actually looking for a solution. They don't like the solution that they're hearing, but they're looking for something. Okay. John wants to know, when is the next firewall? Love him. John, I apologize so much. I'm almost done with this thing. It's been sitting on my shoulders forever. And when that happens, we're going to uncrank a bunch of new stuff. And I think the next firewall will be talking into insanity. This whole idea that you can argue your way out of it. So the transsexuals are doing their transsexual thing, and the straight people that they want to get are not interested in them, and they can't make them. That's one thing they can't do. These women cannot make these $500,000 a year men marry them at 38 when they're 40 pounds overweight with 3 kids. They can't make them do it. They can't talk them into it. They can't shame them into it. Well, you see this all the time. I'm not making this up. These trans activists are saying, they've done it. They have injected all of these hormones into their body. They've cut off their reproductive organs. That makes them sterile for the rest of their lives, and in many cases incapable of orgasm as well, right? And they've done all of this. That's how much they believe it. That's how much they believe it. They believe, if I just do these things, and we now have the surgery, and now I'll be a woman, so I'm going to do this, and they do it. And when they do it, they find to their amazement that they are not able to talk straight males into marrying them, because straight males like biological females. And somehow, believe it or not, the straight males are apparently able to tell the difference. Isn't that something? Hey, first super chat from Twin Talon. Thank you very much. I think it all goes back to Yuri, subversion, the gender war, trans kids, womanism, media, instruction, Hollywood, business, military capture, faker in chief, IRS targeting the right, all of it. It's subversion. Yuri was right. Yes, exactly. Yuri that she's talking about is, there was a KGB defector who sat down in the 70s, I want to say, and he's basically in charge of the Soviet era, the Soviet effort to destroy America. And he laid out what they need to do. And they did. And he didn't just like kind of say, we need to undermine Western morality. He's like, no. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this, and then we'll do this. We'll make sure that people get into journalism first, because if we get them into journalism, if we can get left-wingers into journalism, we can control the information flow. If we control the information flow, then we convince the next generation that our view is right, and then we put those people not into journalism, put them into education. So then they can spread this virus to this whole new generation, and then we will essentially do what we want to do. And they have been so successful at it that, like all of you, it's tempting for times for me just throw up my arms and just get the beans and the ammo, head up to the hills, and just watch it burn. But they cannot bend reality to their will. And this is their great weakness, because they think they can. And I am coming from not only all this pop culture stuff I've been talking about, I'm coming from 6 months of intense research, note-taking, study, and writing on the birth of the Soviet Union, which was the largest experiment in magical thinking in the history of the world that killed 100 million people. And again and again and again, I'm watching how this doesn't work. And then I'm talking about the Soviets now. Then I'm watching these people, instead of changing their minds, I watch what they do in order to not change their minds. They'll kill 7 million people in 2 years of forced starvation because they don't want to change their minds. Just to switch to the Soviets as an example here, and then, like I said, this rule of thumb for the Stratosphere Lounge, when I say I'm done talking about something, when I say that 5 times, then I'm probably pretty close to being done talking about it. But let's just talk about the Soviets, for example, and this left-wing magical thinking. Left-wing politics are very simple when you get right down to it. They're simple and consistent. It is the belief that you can change human nature through intellectualism, through the brain. That means through conditioning, brainwashing, propaganda, aspirations, demonizing the opposition, all these things. They believe that they can change human nature, and this is why they fail. And this is why we're going to win. Because the United States was designed by men who understood how humans work, including, and not only including, especially the negative side of human psychology. And so they built a government that dealt with humanity as it is, not as it should be. They figured out that people will go into politics in order to gain power. That will lead to tyranny, which will lead to misery. Thank you very much, Monk in Training. Stay good, Bill Semper. Semper to you too, pal. Although I don't feel like I'm qualified to say that. It's a pretty exclusive club that I'm not a member of, but means an awful lot to me hearing about it. So let's just wrap up with this idea of what happens when you do get the world that these woke politicians and these kids want. What happens when you get this socialism and all this? I'm coming to work, by the way. Took a little nap from the morning, and as I'm coming in, I go past this high school that I see every day. It's on my drive back and forth, and they put a new banner up, and it's got the name of the school. I'm not going to give the name of the school, and it's a new banner. And I thought, oh, okay, great, they got a new banner up there. That's great. Look at that, school pride. Be true to your school. Blah blah blah. And then there's the handshake, a black and white handshake, which happens to be exactly the symbol that George Orwell used in 1984 for INGSOC, English socialism, right? So I see that, and that gets my attention. And then I realize right after that, in giant letters, huge, 4 or 5 foot tall letters across the entire chain link fence of this school, it says, it's got that handshake, and it says, committed to gender and racial equity, not equality, equity. And we all know the difference between equity and equality. Equality means equality of opportunity. Equity means equality of result. So there's this giant school advertising the fact that they are teaching the kids that they say it, spell it right out. What's the term? Gender and racial equity. Okay. So what happens when you get this economic equity? Well, I just spent the last 5 months wondering why I couldn't get out of the Russian Revolution. I thought I'd be dealing with the whole history of the Soviet Union. I just finished the 6th script, and Lenin's still alive. He was alive from 1917 to 1924. I'm still with Lenin. I'm with Lenin because the more I learn about this thing, the more I realize that the murder is built into the system in the Soviet Union. It's built into it, baked into the structure, can't change it. And that all of it was put there not by Stalin, by Lenin. The left wants to say, well, Lenin had a perfect society, everybody was very happy. Stalin came along and ruined it. No. Lenin wrote the instruction manual, and Stalin followed the instructions. That's why I can't get away from the revolution. So I'm dealing with all of this stuff and how it got established, how a guy who was away from his own country for most of his life, who spent the previous 17 years in Paris, London, and Switzerland, sipping tea in a cafe, talking about what has to happen back in Russia, who then comes to Russia, and through sheer force of will, which you have to give him that, he and Adolf Hitler and Stalin, all of those, 3 of these guys just had history-bending willpower. But there's Lenin with a theory, reading Marx, who had a theory, and then implementing the theory over the practicality. I think I talked about this briefly last week. It's worth a quick little spin around for those people that are here with us new, or those that are interested in the topic of left-wing outcomes. Prior to the revolution, 15 years before the revolution, the Tsar had a prime minister, the best politician ever happened to Russia, named Stolypin. And Stolypin looked around at all of this constant famines and all of the rest of this stuff, and he said, these collectives that the Tsar gave to the people when he freed the serfs are ridiculous. Everybody owns a row. I have 1 row on the farm, and then I have another row quarter mile away. It's nuts. We're going to divide it up into private farms, and then you're going to farm that. So he does. And Russia, pre-Soviet Union, goes from having constant famines to producing 30% more agricultural output than Canada, Argentina, and the United States combined. He goes to private property, and bammo, it works like a charm. But it's private property. So now along come the socialists and the communists with their theory, with Marxist theory. And through a power play and through agitation and turning everybody against everybody else, and by making everybody else's enemy, and murder and all the rest of it, intimidation, propaganda, lying, all of it, Lenin manages to reach a position of power. First thing he does, first day, is he bans opposition newspapers. Then he bans opposition parties. Then he tries to rig an election. When he loses the election, he simply shuts down the Congress. And then he starts going after the kulaks, after the farmers that had been successful, after those people that Stolypin had created 15 years earlier that had done the unthinkable crime of having fed their country and other countries too on top of it. He decides he's going after these rich peasants. These are the new oppressors. This is the one percenter now for Lenin. Lenin is saying that the one percenters who we have to go and kill and burn, literally kill, are the rich peasants, the ones with 2 cows. Those people are the class enemy. They must be killed. So he goes out and kills them. Kills them all with machine guns and artillery, right? Machine guns and artillery. Because his theory says that these should be proletarian workers in factories. And besides, they own their own land, and we've abolished private property, which means that, much like Klaus Schwab, it means that, no, the peasants don't own the stuff. And there are no capitalists who own it. There is no private property. Nobody owns it, except for the Communist Party. They own everything. That's what they want. So what happens? So he offers. He basically says to the farmers that have changed the world, changed Russian life for 12 years, right? Maybe. Starting to actually work, and then the catastrophe happens, and Lenin gains political power. In the time that Lenin and the communists had taken over the government, part of it was due to the transitional government, the provisional government, Kerensky's government. But basically, underneath the communists, the Bolsheviks, before they named themselves the communists, inflation in Russia reaches 600%. So by the time that Lenin is ready to buy grain from these privatized farmers, prices are 6 times what they were prior to the revolution. So Lenin says to the peasants, we will buy your grain and your cattle because our cities are starving. We will buy it from you, but we'll buy it from you at pre-revolution prices, which is 1/6 of the current value of the grain and the livestock. And the peasants, these are peasants. These are the people who he did the revolution in the name of, right? The peasants say, well, decline with thanks, right? Thank you. But we're not going to take that deal. So what the peasants end up doing is they end up stockpiling grain for when the communists come back with a reasonable offer, right? They're happy to sell them the grain, but they're not going to sell them the grain at 1/6 of what it costs to produce and 1/6 of what they need to live. So they start stockpiling it. But unfortunately for them, the communists don't come back with a reasonable offer. They come back with armored cars and machine guns and Cheka agents wearing black trench coats and artillery. And they go through these villages and they take all of the food. When I say take all the food, they take all of the food. They know the peasants have been hoarding it, so they start torturing fathers. Actually, what they start doing is they start torturing children in front of the fathers until they reveal where they've kept their secret stockpiles, which are a sack of grain, right? It's not like they've got a factory hidden out in the woods. These are people who have 1 cow is a rich guy in these villages, right? Okay, so they go through, murder and kill everybody, put the women and children in a church, lock the doors on the church, burn the church down. This is what you get for being, counter-revolutionary. And so they steal all the stuff, especially including the seed corn. So they not only take all of the crops, they take what the peasants need to make crops next year, not only because they need the food now, but because that's who they are. It's what they do. They murder people. They wanted to murder them off of their farms and get them to work on collective farms, but they wanted most of those peasants to work in factories because then they'd be the proletariat, and if there was a proletariat, then Russia would be the kind of country that Marx said would happen. But no. So anytime you get something in the real world, like Stolypin's reforms, that go from catastrophe to abundance, and that goes against left-wing theory, that has to be destroyed. And the ultimate irony of this is, after Lenin kills all of these people and murders them and reduces the country to ruin, after 2 or 3 years of this, by 1922-23, he looks at what Lenin, you got to give one thing to. He was a pragmatic guy in terms of I will do anything to maintain power and the revolution. If that means making a deal with the Germans while we're at war with Germany and give up half the country at Brest-Litovsk, then that's what we'll do. Whatever we have to do to stay in power, we'll do. So after 3-4 years of this murder and everything's collapsing and everybody's starving, Lenin announces to the Politburo, to the Communist Party Central Committee, all of it, he announces that we are going to start something called the New Economic Plan, New Economic Policy, NEP, NEP, right? What is NEP? NEP is capitalism. Our country's falling apart because we've enforced our communist views on it, and it's falling apart. We have no money. We are starving our people and murdering them for their grain, and then we are selling that grain on the international market so that the Communist Party can make money and take that money and put it into communist uprisings around the world through Comintern. By the way, in the middle of this incredible famine and murder, where the Russians, 10, 20 million Russians are starving to death, and the country is going under, Lenin is stealing their crops, murdering them, and then taking that grain and selling it on the market for money, like I said, so he can support his Comintern to start the big revolution around the world. So you know what happens when these Russians are starving? You know who finally decides that we can't take any more of this? Is it the loving socialists who starved their own people to make money so they could send more socialism anywhere? No. You know what happens? Somebody comes to the rescue of Russia after 2-3 years of starvation. You know who it is? It's those evil capitalist Americans. The American people start something called the American Relief Act because the people in Russia that were starving were it was so offensive to good people living in America that they took their hard-earned capitalist money and gave it to an agency that went across to the communist country and fed 10 million people out of their own pockets. The American people donated enough money for the American Relief Agency to go to communist Russia and feed the starving communists. And the only reason they left after feeding 10 million people was it became clear to them that the grain, listen now, the grain that American private citizens had voluntarily paid for to help the starving Russians. I'm going to write a check, right, to this American Relief Fund. They're going to take the check. They're going to buy some American wheat. They're going to ship it over to Russia. They're going to feed it to the starving people and distribute it. But what they find is, after a while, that the grain that they've bought to feed them, that grain also is being immediately taken away. It's not going to the people. He's selling it on the market to make money so that he can also continue to cause communist revolutions around the world, including in America. We got that straight? Russia's starving. Lenin doesn't care. America puts up private money to help feed them, and the grain they take to feed the starving Russians is used not to feed the people, but to sell on the international market for money to cause a communist revolution in America. That is what factually happened. That's factually what happened. That's what this is what this kind of politics does. It's just plain. This is what happens when theory becomes more important than practicality. So you've got starving Russia, not starving, but repeated famines under the Tsar. What are we going to do about this? This Prime Minister Stolypin, who's been a land management guy, comes in, privatizes all of these collective farms, turns Russia from a basket case into the #1 exporter of grain in the world. This lasts for 11 years. Then the communists come over, take over, kill all the private farmers. Now you're back to mass starvation. The capitalist Americans send aid over. That is being sold for money, so that doesn't work. And then, after all these people are dead, Lenin finally says, you know what, we're going to have to start the new economic plan. We're going to have to go back to a form of capitalism. What do you mean a form of capitalism? Well, we're going to have to let the peasants set their own prices and sell to whoever they want to. And all of these Bolsheviks look at him like, isn't this what we just fought against? Yes, well, we have to make compromises. We have to do whatever to do to save the revolution. If we have to lose a battle to win the war, blah, 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 blah. So they reintroduce capitalism into Russia, into communist Russia, and in 3 months, the shortages are gone. And that would have been that, except for after the shortages have gone, you wait a little while, Lenin dies of a stroke. He then, things get better for a while, and then Stalin decides, we got to kill everybody who could be a possible threat to me and our power base. So after 7 or 8 years of the new economic plan, then they start killing those people too. Start killing them too. That's history. There's no denying it. And if you ask American communists if this happened, they won't deny it. They'll tell you it was worth it. They still think it's worth it. 100 million, maybe 150, 200 million people killed to bring this big dream of equity to life. Yeah, it's worth it. And how many people is it going to take to kill in order to make this happen? As many as it takes. I did a show. It wasn't a Tea Party event. It wasn't a college either. I think it might have been like a Young Americans for Freedom seminar, something like that. And I was talking about private property, and there was a rumpled woman in the front row, and you could just tell she was just a plain communist. And she was tissing the whole way through. And I said, let me make sure I understand something, ma'am. You're saying that if there was to be a policy that would take people out of poverty, and by taking them out of poverty, that meant the rich got richer, you would be against that, right? Yes, I'd be against that. So all these people who claim that you're for the poor people, you would rather have poor people suffering and rich people suffering together than anything that took poor people out of poverty and gave them a perfectly fine lifestyle, but if that made the rich richer, you'd be against that. Yes. Envy, hatred, laziness, and just plain spite. That's the fuel that they use. Hopefully, those of you who've been members here and have asked where the firewalls and stuff, hopefully when you see this stuff, well, like I said, the Cold War will be coming out on Tuesday, first 2 episodes, but hopefully you will appreciate what I already have appreciated, and that is thank you for allowing me to spend so much time on that while you're paying me to deliver content here that I'm not delivering. So I'm very grateful for that. All right, speaking of that, let's go to BillWhittle.com here. I know somebody said, what about Facebook questions? Got a capitalist system going here. I'm down on the side of the oppression. That story about when I found out about the American Relief Agency, I just it wasn't like I was surprised. It's just like, oh, what else do you need? Doesn't matter. Nothing ever will change their mind except for personal misery. That's all there is, and we're starting to see it. All right. Here we are at the absolutely fabulous BillWhittle.com website. And by the way, this isn't just a sales pitch, it's just another piece of true information. We don't have a lot of people at BillWhittle.com, but anybody who's a member at BillWhittle.com can start their own kind of blog there. And the number of stories that get posted there that I have nothing to do with are not only amazing, they're superb. They really are. The posts that the members put up, I would love to be able to read every one of them and comment on every one of them. I only get to read some of them, maybe most of them. But what's going on there just among the members is fantastic. So if you feel like you want somebody who feels the same way you do and agrees with you about most things but doesn't agree with you about everything and have a civil discussion about things you disagree with, you might want to think about heading over to BillWhittle.com and punching that membership button. Punch it hard. Okay, 217-23, Stratosphere Lounge questions. All right. There's probably questions in here that have been recycled. They've been, it's like when they find a body, that's somehow they're doing like work on a building's foundation and they find a secret room that's been boarded up and then somebody died in that room 70 years ago and stuff, that kind of thing. There's probably questions in the forum that are like that, they've been there that long. So I'll move that over here and I will take a look at this over here. Okay, here we go. Cody, I'm going to this is mostly for me is a content information, content suggestion. So I'm not going to really read that just yet. Uh, well, it's a funding issue. Cody, I'm not really quite sure that's a question. I've read it and it makes great sense to me, but respectfully, I'm going to just kind of move on and take a question here or two or three. So here's Joe R. Hello, Joe. Hi, Bill. Now, one thing about me taking questions after 2.5 hours of show is fair chance I've covered some of this already, but let's see what we got here. Hi, Bill. It really seems like this woke cultism and 1984 style push towards totalitarian society has really accelerated full speed ahead since COVID. Yes. And it shows no signs of slowing down. Yes. Let me just say one thing about that because he's got a bunch more to say. COVID, I have an opinion on my opinion on where it came from and how it got there. That opinion has been backed up by so many sources that even though I was insane and dangerous, like so many other people back in April of 2020 when we knew these things, now it's pretty much well established that that COVID, the unknown virus of unspecified origin, we know where it came from. The big question is, did it come from there intentionally or not? I'm inclined to believe not. I'm inclined to believe it was incompetence, but it's not really relevant. The one thing that I noticed about COVID, and I noticed this very early, by the time they locked us down on March 18th here, I think, while I was doing a show, somebody in the comment section said, "You're locked down, your state at midnight, you got to be home." Well, that's interesting. But once this thing started hitting and I started looking at the numbers, you have to dig for the real numbers, right? And I started looking at the actual fatalities, who they were, how it affected, zero effect on 0 to 10, zero effect on 10 to 20, maybe a half of 1%, 20 to 30, and then just bigger and bigger and bigger, right? The one thing I realized immediately about COVID and kind of a widespread sort of wide net sensor net thing, I wasn't anything like specialized enough to get to the individual details, but instead of drilling down, looking wide, the first thing I noticed about COVID was this is a very, very interesting mortality rate. Very interesting mortality rate. If it had been less serious, because it was real, I mean, there were a lot of people died of COVID, or with COVID, I should say, including my mom. If the mortality rate had been any lower, well, Gary says I dropped the ball. If it was, listen, if it was intentionally released, Gary, if it was intentionally released, then why the hell would they intentionally release it where they cooked it? That's the part about it I don't understand. I'm not saying they're not capable of it. I'm just saying it doesn't seem to make sense to me that if you're going to claim that this is a disease from the wild, and then okay, it's just bats. If that's the case, wouldn't you release it from where the bats are? That's what makes me think it was an accident, was because the epicenter is right at the Wuhan virology lab. Anyway, whether it's released intentionally or not, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The thing I noticed about COVID early was that the mortality rate is dialed perfectly. What I mean by that is it is serious enough so that people can be afraid of it, but it's not so serious that it cripples society. It was Lord Bios says COVID wasn't from a lab, and I respect Lord Bios very, very much. He helped me through a lot of stuff, so I'm interested in hearing what you have to say, but not right this second. Because regardless of whether it came intentionally or not, it's not the point. The point is that the mortality rate was perfectly dialed in. It was enough, it was serious enough to scare people to death, but not so serious to, when I say cripple society, it didn't cripple society. It culled it, right? It culled it, but it didn't cripple it. It put small businesses out of business at the expense of large businesses like Amazon, right? I'm certainly not, when I say it doesn't matter Wendy, see what I'm saying? It doesn't matter for the argument right this second. Of course it matters. It's a criminal investigation, one of the greatest crimes in history. Nevertheless, that's not the point I'm trying to make. I got to stick to the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is the mortality rate was serious enough to be able to lock people in and have them believe it was actually, I believe, coconut ED5. That's what I personally believe. My personal belief, he says, my personal belief was accidentally released before they intended. That's my personal belief. But again, doesn't matter. Let's say it came from space on a meteor. What's interesting about the mortality rate was it was serious enough to get people to take a knee, but not so serious that it fundamentally destroyed the economy of the country permanently. What it did was, in fact, this is the point. It was the mortality rate for COVID was so low that anybody who wanted to simply look at the actual data realized that this is not nearly as serious as it can be. But there was enough of a crisis so that if you're doing nothing but watching the pandemic porn on COVID, you could come to the belief that it's Ebola. It's like aerial aerosolized Ebola, like airborne Ebola. People rapidly here's what happened. When this thing hit, the country divided up into two different camps. There was the camp that listened to everything that the government and the news said and took that as revealed scripture. And then there were the people who took a practical view of what they were seeing with their own eyes. And that's, you think about it, that's the difference between conservatives and progressives. Progressives believe in a theory. Conservatives test what they see against reality. Progressives say, yeah, it works in practice, but will it work in theory? I know that COVID has nothing to do with Ebola. I'm saying people were treating it as if it was aerosolized Ebola. Ebola is something to be genuinely frightened about, and so is Marburg. All of that stuff, those I forget the name of them, the blood clotting diseases, the ones that eliminate the lining cells of the blood vessels. Those viruses are horrifying, right? I wasn't saying COVID was Ebola. I was saying some people were treating COVID as if it was hemorrhagic fevers. People were treating COVID as if it were airborne, highly contagious Ebola, not like what it actually was. And so what ended up happening is the society, here's the best term for it. Parliament, British Parliament, when they vote, they don't vote in the way that we understand it. Once an issue comes up, everybody leaves the House of Commons and they go into either a room that is the yeas and a room that's the nays. It's called dividing the House. People get up and then they walk out and they either go to one room or another based on how they feel about the subject that's being discussed. It's called dividing the House. They would get up and go into that. That's exactly what happened in this country. Everybody in the country got up and walked into one of two different houses, one or two different rooms. There was the room that believed that this was a deadly, scything disease that was going to kill anybody who wasn't constantly washing their hands, disinfecting themselves, masks, 7 masks, all the rest of it. Those people were living in a state of perpetual fear. And I was never afraid of COVID. That's not true. There was probably a week. There's probably a week or two when I was pretty worried. Somewhere right around middle of March, I was pretty worried because we didn't know. But once it started to hit, then I could see with my own eyes. I would drive past a hospital, and I was expecting to see a line of ambulances and patients lying on the road waiting to be taken in, and I didn't see that. And when they released, I don't know if you remember this, there was a period in April where they had figured out here is where peak infection rates are going to be, and they had it charted for every single state, right? California's going to hit theirs on April 22nd. Oregon's going to hit theirs on the 29th. It was a really, boom, 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 pretty tightly reasoned argument on their part. That may have in fact been true in terms of the infection rates. But when we went through the peak, and it turned out that we were not seeing anything like what we were afraid. Look, when I really decided that this thing was being oversold, I remember the moment very clearly. Before things got really serious, they took the hospital ships. Was it the Hope? Is it Hope and Comfort? They're two enormous U.S. hospital ships. They're designed to deal with mass casualties overseas. One of them went to New York Harbor, and the other one went to L.A. Harbor. And the one that went to New York Harbor was there ready to, I think it had a capacity of like 5,000 patients, something like that. And they had set up outdoor treatment centers with tarps over it and all. Comfort and Mercy. Thank you. Comfort and Mercy. So I think it was Comfort in New York. And so when this thing is happening, it's like this hospital ship is pulled up. They're going to take the most contagious cases. They're going to put them on board the hospital ship, right? And when that fills up, then they've got these spaces on the dock. That's reasonable precaution for something really terrifying. But somewhere by the third week of April, I think, not much later than that, Comfort, the hospital ship, had taken something like 16 patients. And shortly after everybody got locked down, it sailed out of New York Harbor because it wasn't needed. I'm not saying the hospitals weren't overwhelmed. I'm just saying no, we don't need it. And when I heard that, no, they're sailing that ship away, which of course you never heard in the media, that's when I said, okay, all right. 2 weeks to flatten the curve, I'm completely down with that. We didn't know what we didn't know. But when it turned into 6 months and then a year, 2 years, now it's 3 years to flatten the curve. Many of the people in the country have gone from those two rooms back into the main chamber. In other words, they're essentially agnostic about this. But most people, I would say, are still in either one of those two rooms that they went into during the course of the pandemic. There are people who thought the whole time that this thing is way overblown, looked at the actual statistics of who was dying at what age, calculated the risk. That's exactly what I did, by the way. I took a look at where am I? Okay, so my age group, I have a I forget what it was, 1.5% chance of it being a fatality. If I hit the 1 in 10 chance of catching it, and that 1% or whatever mortality was based on an average of people who had 3 comorbidities, right? People who have diabetes and they're overweight or emphysema already. I said that's a risk I'll take. I'm happy to take it. In fact, I wanted to get it so I could get it over with, get immunity for it. That's what eventually happened to me. But in April of 2020, when they locked us down, I just told Natasha, I said, honey, look, I just want to go down to LAX and start licking doorknobs, just get it over with, right? Let's get it over with. Everybody's going to get it, so let's just get it over with, one way or another. Now, when I got it, it laid me low. I was sick. But nevertheless, the point I'm making here is we were talking about this taking over people, and we're talking about these power moves and so on. It didn't just do the economic damage and especially the political damage. What it did was it basically marked the population. It not only marked who was hysterical about it and who wasn't. It marked who was going to be submitting and who wasn't. Now, I live in California. When I had to go outside, they shut down restaurants for 6 months, and I had to wear a mask at restaurants. So I did all that stuff, right? So yeah, I submitted to that. But there are people in California now, all the time out there, who are wearing their masks today, outside, walking down the street alone, or in their car alone, wearing their masks. And that, to me, I'll tell you what that is. When I see people wearing a mask today, those are the things. When you go out, like ATVing, four-wheeling on the dunes, because we have great dunes out here, not far from me. Going over the dunes, right? You've got those enormous long safety flags, right? You get this really loose, thin antenna with a little pennant at the top. And all it's designed to do is show you that there's a vehicle there that you can't see, right? Those are the enormous safety flag things, right? That's what I think these masks are today. Whenever I see somebody wearing a mask today, all I see is a giant warning flag saying this person's neurotic. This is a neurotic person who is so determined to show everybody that they're one of the good ones, that there they are, right? And by the way, I think wasn't it 2 weeks ago or something, Steve Colbert said something on, it's hard to say Steve Colbert and the Tonight Show because I grew up with the Tonight Show, but I think a week or two ago, Steve Colbert announced to his audience that the government had decided that in another 2 months or something, they would officially declare the end of the emergency. And they did a reversal to the audience, and everybody in the audience was wearing a mask. It's possible that they set that up as a joke, but I don't think it was. Right? I don't think it was. Anyway, this is the question from Joe. I've gotten through one sentence of one of the questions, obviously. But the thing I wanted to say about that was that it was so useful to them. It's so useful to people who are not the Friends of Freedom to know how much of a reaction you can get out of how much of the population. They learned that some people you can scare to death forever and nothing will get through to them, including years afterwards. You learned that there were some people who from the beginning said, okay, either guys like me who said, all right, it's going to happen or not happen. You know, it's a year before the vaccine and stuff. It's like, all right, let's get it done. One way or another, let's find out, right? I'm not going to live my life in fear and indoors. I'm going to, if it's here and it's not going away, and it's not, once I realize it's not going away, it's going to be here forever. I said, all right, honey, our chances of surviving this are excellent. It's not 100%, but it's excellent. And since it's not going to affect us one way or another, let's just get it over with. By the way, interestingly enough, David McFadden on YouTube says that Colbert was apparently on the flight logs for Epstein's Island. Don't you find that interesting? I find that quite interesting. Yeah, the French restaurant was when I not only knew it was a lie, but French Laundry. But that's when I realized that, no, there's obviously... But it tells you who's willing to look at data versus who's willing to listen to what they're being told. It was a division of the country. This is what you're being told. This is what I see. I'm going to trust my own lying eyes on this one. Governor of California is sitting there with medical professionals, donors to his campaign, indoors, shoulder to shoulder, nobody's wearing masks. That tells me what I need to know. It's the same thing as when people take their private jets to a global warming conference. That tells me what I need to know. That's data. Anyway, back to our first question of the night here. Almost 3 hours into the show. All the censorship and social media, this is back to Joe R. Social media collusion with the federal government, endless Biden scandals and the Biden crime family activities being exposed. It all seems to go in and out of the news cycle, if reported at all, within days, and then no one talks about it anymore, and it goes unaddressed, unresolved, i.e. Biden's classified document scandal. I'm not optimistic about the future. I think a lot more people are on board with this big government nanny state trans woke ideology than we think. 42% national Biden approval rating, ? Even though that isn't good, it's uncomfortably high, could agree. How could that be? Well, number one, we don't know if that's the real approval rating or the one that we're being shown, but nevertheless. I remember you saying conservatives outnumber liberals 2-1. I don't remember exactly saying that, but if you say I did, I undoubtedly did. But how does that not reflect in our elections, cheating aside? Are independents still favoring Democrats despite all this insanity on all levels? Do you really think we have a shot at winning the 2024 elections, or are we doomed given the corrupt election system in the swing states have gone unaddressed? Republicans outvoted Democrats by 3 or 4 million votes nationwide, but that didn't translate into congressional or Senate wins. The agenda to disarm Americans seems to be gaining steam and is accelerating at an alarming rate, with states passing anti-2A legislation. For example, states just ignore the Supreme Court rulings and no one does anything about it. It seems like there are no consequences. Things are looking really bad, in my opinion. I'm the most worried I have ever been. What are your thoughts? P.S. What do you think of my new AK-47? He sent a picture of the AK. It looks like it's a carbon fiber stuff. It looks like somebody bred an AK-47 with an AR-15. It's the coolest looking AK-47 I've ever seen, and I mean no offense by this, Joe. I know the giant battle between AK-47 and AR-15s. There's something about the AK-47 that whenever I see an AK-47, that is the enemy weapon, and I can't shake it. I just can't. I just can't shake it. Everybody I've ever seen that was fighting against freedom, I'm talking about governments, were holding an AK-47. However, when the good guys hold an AK-47, there's a lot to be said for the AK-47s. So I'm not going to get into the AK-47 AR-15 argument. It's a beautiful picture. And by the way, that was a picture of Joe's AK-47 before it was lost overboard in a tragic boating accident. So let's work this thing backwards. Things are looking really bad in my opinion. I'm the most worried I've ever been. What are your thoughts? My thoughts are things are looking very bad, and I'm the most worried I've ever been. Those are my thoughts. But look, when things really stop, when things stop, when things start going against you hard, and they keep coming, I think anybody has an opportunity to do a couple of things. You can either give up in despair, and I'm not accusing you of doing that. I'm just saying it's one option. It's over. We're done. I do hear that, and I'm not hearing it from you, but I do hear it. You can change your mind and say, wow, I guess this global warming thing is true, so you can get on the winning side. That's one option. You can live in a state of delusion like the people we were talking about at the beginning of the show, where you say, no, everything's fine, there's nothing to worry about, everything's just great. That's another option. Or you can do what I tend to do, which is try to find whatever good news I can find in the situation, extrapolate from that as much as I can without becoming Pollyanna, without lying to myself, right? Without whistling past the graveyard kind of thing. So yes, things are bad. Yes, the electoral system is a wreck. All you have to do is look on the 2022 election at 10 o'clock in the morning. I was in Nashville I was going to do commentary that night on Daily Wire, and I come in there in the late afternoon, and I'd love to be a guest on Tim's show. And at around 10 o'clock in the morning out there Nashville time, I walk into Daily Wire. I'm still 5 hours, 6 hours before I go on, and I'm listening to the news, and I see that this guy comes out from one of the Maricopa County things and says, long line of people, says, okay, folks, we got a little problem here. One of our counters isn't working. The other one's working, but it's showing a 30% error rate. And this is in the 10 o'clock in the morning on the election day. And the second I saw that, I thought, I just felt kind of sick, you know? I just felt kind of sick. Like, oh, well, that didn't take long. So to answer your question, which certainly deserves an answer, let me explain to you what I mean by trying to find the bright spots and the hope in a situation that is getting considerably worse all the time and is certainly worse than I've ever seen. One thought I had is, well, 2022 election, Maricopa County showed me we still have enormous problems, and they're probably getting worse. But 2022 also showed me what they did in Florida. Florida was a swing state, right? It was a swing state. It was like, who's going to win Florida? Florida is now the reddest state in the nation. And it's the reddest state in the nation almost exclusively because of Ron DeSantis, and because Ron DeSantis wasn't going at this from a position of charisma or that kind of aspect. It's because of what Ron DeSantis was doing nuts and bolts wise in terms of actually changing the government of Florida. So not only did DeSantis win by 30 points, which is unprecedented, that I've never heard of an election win that big, but all of Florida is red now, right? It is a solid red state. And that told me a couple things. First of all, it told me that I can depend on the election results coming out of Florida, right? I have no confidence in the ones coming out of Arizona, but I do have confidence in Florida's electoral results, right? So I say to myself, if you can do that in Florida, um, what can you apply that elsewhere? And so what this argument ultimately boils down to is, look, when Maricopa County was taking 2 weeks to count the votes because they had to take a while to figure out how many votes they needed, the guy who certified the elections for another county, a very small county in the state of Arizona, rural state, refused to certify his county's results. So Maricopa County wasn't certified yet, hadn't come in, and this one guy who was in charge of the elections for this county, county supervisor for this, refused to certify the votes for his county. His argument being, we're confident about the votes being counted accurately in our county. However, since Maricopa County determines what happens to the entire state of Florida, I'm not going to certify our votes until we're satisfied that Maricopa County handled this thing correctly. Because if I do, I'm complicit in this thing. Incredible position, right? And then you see this guy on camera, and he's sitting there with the other members of his election committee or whoever, the board of county supervisors or whatever, and he's on TV and he says, I am now going to certify the votes for my county under duress. I am doing this under duress. I have been approached by federal agents who threaten me with felonies and locking me up, and I have a family that I have to deal with and a family that I have to protect, and I'm sorry, that's more important to me, so I'm just going to basically go along with it. That's not normal, right? That's not normal. So DeSantis is not just slinging rhetoric at the left. Once he has some evidence, like the Disney leaked Zoom call where everybody's talking about, yeah, we're going to make all of our characters gay and trans, and we're gonna basically get all of the kids on board with this thing. Now he's got evidence. Now he's got enough evidence to get the anti-grooming laws passed. And when Disney protests this, and then when Disney employees protest this, and finally Bob Chapek is forced, who is basically saying, we're not a political company, let's just stay out of it. So there's this leaked memo from Disney. DeSantis says, here's the evidence. They passed the law, the so-called Don't Say Gay law, which has nothing to do with that, obviously, but we all know what that is. So they pass that law. Then the Disney employees essentially riot and go on strike. Then the head of Disney, who has actually not said anything, basically says, you're right. He throws his hands up and says, he takes a knee to the mob. He says, this is really unfair, and I have so much I need to learn, and I need more education, and all of his ritual harakiri, right? So then DeSantis realizes that Disney's official position is going to be backing what was released here. So what DeSantis did was he said, well, what is it about Disney? Disney, the number one tourist destination in the world is Orlando, Florida. And I saw Orlando, Florida right around 73. Disney World opened, I want to say, in 72. And Orlando was a hitching post, right? Disney World made Orlando, and once people started going to Disney World, everything else got in there. Now it's the number one destination in the world for tourists. But as many of you know, when the land that Walt Disney bought, Walt Disney's prospectus for Disneyland, the original Disneyland, said, we want a place to showcase American values. We think that Disneyland should be a place, not just the happiest place on earth, but a place that shows off American values. So Walt had nothing to do with this. So he buys all this worthless swampland in Florida. And in order to get the land, it was in Disney's interest and it was in Florida's interest to make a deal for the Something Creek, I forget what it's called, I think the Something Creek, something administrative zone. Basically what happened is Walt said, we're going to buy a ton of land here and we're going to bring a lot of money into this area, but in exchange for this, we want tax breaks. We want to govern ourselves, essentially, is what it means, right? And they had this in place since 1972. Reedy Creek. Thank you. The Reedy Creek. The Reedy Creek Administrative Zone. So it made sense for Disney. We're going to spend so much money here, we need some tax breaks. Florida said, okay, yeah, be good for Florida. We'll give you these breaks, but the revenue we're going to get from all of these tourists and all the sales tax more than outdoes it. Fantastic. Now they've had That's special zone since 1972, and it gives Disney Inc. through Disney World enormous benefits. And when Disney decided to go woke publicly, Ron DeSantis said, okay, it's your private company, do whatever you want to. But if you're going to get in on politics, then we're going to play politics with you. We're going to revoke these special conditions at Reedy Creek. And that was something. So, if Florida can be saved and Florida can become a well-governed state where people are moving and even progressives who are coming from California get to Florida and say, I just can't believe the state of the roads. Everything's incredible. Everything works here. Yeah, it really does. That tells me that it can be done. And that also tells me that there is as an interim, right? Joe, the electoral system is the number one problem now. I rank it highly. I rank the electoral system as a bigger threat than big tech and the border combined, probably. But it showed me that it is possible to make a state essentially fraud proof. Now, does that mean that can happen in the rest of the country? No. And it doesn't really have to. If it were me, what I would be planning on doing now would be to Floridify, or fluoridate maybe is a better word, to Floridify enough states that are likely to be able to go that way. If you could Floridify enough states to get you fair elections and enough for a presidential electoral college win, that is a step back towards the republic. That's not something to be proud of, but essentially what I'm saying is that if you take Arizona to be irredeemably corrupt, and I do, and California irredeemably corrupt, and I do, and New York and all the rest of it, can you get enough states to have fair election results like Florida, which was instantaneous? They after 2000, that debacle, they just fixed it. If you can do that, then what you've essentially done is you've done what a lot of people are talking about doing, which is you've essentially divided the country into two camps. And if you have enough states that have fair elections, then what you're essentially saying is, yes, California is a corrupt S-hole, and so is New York, and it's getting worse and worse and worse, and all of it. And there's nothing we can do about that now. But the question is, if you can get enough states to be honest about it, then you win on a national level, and you have to win on a federal level in order to make the changes that need to be made across the country. So if it were me, looking at this as a military campaign, I would say, hey, we used to own this territory, and now we've been overrun, and we've lost this place, and we've lost this place, this place, this place. We're just on the retreat, blah, blah, blah. They're going to push us into the ocean like in Korea. We're in the Pusan pocket down to the very bottom end of the peninsula. But we can hold here. And if we can hold here and stabilize the lines, which would be Florida, then we can take what's working in Florida, because then once they held Pusan, all of this stuff came over from Japan, and the communists took over the country in the space of 2-3 weeks at the beginning of the Korean War. And once we built up enough forces there, it ran the film backwards, just rolled them back up all the way to Pyongyang, and we took Pyongyang. So that's what I would do. I would look at how you could do this, and I'd like to see more coordination. But my point is that is a realistically optimistic path. That is one of many optimistic paths that are still there. I think it takes into account the genuine damage that's been done and the severity of the situation we're facing, and provides you with a sense of hope that is not simply wishful thinking. It's not just Pollyanna-ish. So you fortify the states that are fair. You fortify them, and you vote with your feet if you want to, because that's nothing but good, right? More people that move to. I know a lot of people say that, and it's obviously practically a meme. So the the perception is that Californians leave California and go ruin other states. Right? All these Californians leave California, go to Texas and ruin Texas. And I bought that forever. But Jeremy at Daily Wire said, no, we did a lot of looking into this. And what he found was, and this actually makes sense if you think about it. He said what he found was that the Texans who had come from California were voting more conservatively than the Texans that lived in Texas. And I thought, what? And then I realized, no, that actually makes sense. The people that have been forced to leave California are leaving California because they're conservative, right? They're the ones who can't take it. So what you're really doing is you're taking all of the red out of California. You're making California even bluer because whatever red citizens there were are going to red states where they're more comfortable. But you're basically consolidating much smaller territory. You're forming a defensive perimeter, and you can look at the American South as a largely defensive perimeter because that's where most of the per capita patriots are. Right? Kind of ironic, really, that the states that formed the Confederacy are really the states that are now the ones most in favor of colorblind universal freedom. But that seems to be the case. So I would just concentrate on locking down the states that we already have as fair, not at the Republican that are just as fair, because if they're fair, they'll be Republican. And then, one by one, as these other states collapse, you go in there and do the kind of things that I'm good at and make a point, a political point of your state is falling apart and you're living in hell because of who you voted for, and just over here we are, and everything's fine. So you don't have to sell your house. All you have to do is sell the politicians that you got. Insane Fame for a super chat says, Bill, have you seen the new Star Trek Picard episode, Next Generation? It's the single best ST episode since the original TNG. I have not seen it. And if you want to bring that back on Monday, we'll talk about pop culture on Monday on Stratosphere Studios. But thank you very much for the super chat and Insane Fame. That's a really great thing. Scotty says, Bill, we see you in Ramona this year. No, because I've already been to Ramona this year. I was down there on January 23rd, I think. When I got there, Ramona Main Stage is my favorite speaking event by far. And I got down there a month ago now, I guess. And I walk in and they said, it's going to be a little smaller crowd today. And I said, okay, what's that? I said, well, our emails didn't get out. I don't remember if he said that they didn't send them or they weren't sent or whatever, but I did a Ramona and as usual had a great time. And as usual, just blew the place away. So I'll be back in 2024. I've done 11 of them, 9 of them in a row. Every January I'm in Ramona. I love it down there. Okay, so hopefully, Joe, that got the essence of it, right? Yes, things are terrible. And yes, it's a tragedy. And yes, we're in deep trouble. But this just came into my head, Joe. That's kind of how you win wars. Every war that we've won was a war where the beginning of the war kicked our teeth in. That's how democracies and republics win wars. They get their teeth kicked in because everybody assumes that they're soft, and then they get themselves up to full pressure, and then they just simply roll over the rest of the world. During the Civil War, there was a discussion between two brothers or cousins, I guess cousins, something like that. They were having a discussion about who was going to win the war based on the character of the Southerners versus the Northerners. And the Southern guys said, and there was evidence for this because this is what was happening in the beginning of the Civil War, the Union was getting its teeth kicked in. And he said, no, the South's going to win the war because Southerners are outsiders. We work on plantations and we ride horses and we have this culture of was it Randolph Scott, somebody Scott, this kind of aristocratic kind of, well, thank you, ma'am, this kind of thing. We've got this whole culture of aristocracy, and that's why we're going to win. We're better soldiers, and they were at the beginning of the war. And the other guy said, no, the North is going to win because here's what you need to understand about the North. And I'm making this case now about America, conservatives. right? Conservatives. This guy was talking about the Union. He said, you need to understand something about our people. Our people are not like your people. Your people are quick to anger. They're very fiery and very temperamental, and that gives them a lot of short-term advantages. He said the North is very calm. He said the North is like a giant boiler filled with cold water. It takes a lot to heat that boiler up. A lot. It takes a long time and a lot of heat. But when that northern boiler is boiling, it will produce enough power so that nothing can stop it. Nothing. And that's exactly what I see. That's what I see in World War II, right? We were at the begin when Pearl Harbor happened. I want to say America had, I think it was something like the 16th largest army in the world. I know Portugal had more equipment than we did. So Pearl Harbor lights a big fire, and then it just starts to build and build and build. And by the time we're done, you know how many aircraft carriers we had when they signed the surrender agreement in Tokyo Bay? At one point in 1942 or 42, maybe 43, probably right around 42, 43. There was a time when the United States, well, the people on board could rightfully say that the war in the Pacific was USS Enterprise versus the Empire of Japan. We had one functioning deck out there. Enterprise held the line by itself for 5-6 months. But when the war was over, we had 33 aircraft carriers anchored either offshore of Tokyo or in the bay. 33. Now, some of those were escort carriers, but still, escort carriers are half a carrier, so they count. Can launch airplanes from them and all that. But we must have had 15 or 20, probably at least 20 of these brand new Essex-class, fast, big, strong carriers. And that's what happens when you heat up the boiler. So that's where my hope lies, and I'm starting to see it happen. So we'll see. GK Masterson, our friend here. Hey, GK, how are you? What a fine fellow he is. So, Bill, do you think that the whole balloon fiasco was China's way of pointing to Taiwan and saying, yeah, they won't defend their own airspace? Do you really think they're going to trade the valley for you? I don't think that's likely. The whole Chinese look. I don't know if you saw it. We put it up yesterday. It was really kind of fun. We did the backstage show for members only, which we always do every week. And we shoot that on Tuesday morning, so that would be 2 days ago as we record this. 21 of the Essex by the end of the war. Thank you. And Fidel was pretty close. And so we started the backstage show where we just goof around and set up what we're going to talk about and do stuff specifically for members. And I said, anybody doing balloons? And they said, no, I'm not doing balloons. And Steve said, I'm not doing balloons. And I said, well, I'm not doing balloons either. I don't want to talk about the balloons. I don't know what this. I don't know anything about it other than what I see. And the whole thing just strikes me as silly. It may not be, maybe deadly serious, but it strikes me as silly. So when Robert Winfield, just for the heck of it, he said at the end of the war, 28 aircraft carriers, 23 battleships, 71 escort carriers, 72 cruisers, over 232 submarines, and 377 destroyers in 1945. That's enough. That'll do it. And 3 years after the war, we scrapped almost all of it, turned it all into razor blades. So when Korea came, we wasn't a question of getting men in tanks to Korea. It was a question of getting men in tanks. Just basically tore it down. A lot to be said about that. A lot of good things it says about a country. So anyway, as far as the balloons go, I think I mentioned this on the last Stratosphere show, or I know I mentioned it on the right angle. The Gulf Stream, high altitude, high speed winds, not the Gulf Stream, the jet stream. The jet stream favors Asia because the winds at altitude will be sometimes 120 miles an hour, like consistently 80 miles an hour. It's a pretty good push up there. We didn't even know that the Gulf Stream existed until we tried to bomb Tokyo from high altitude. Then we realized, why are we going so slow? We're flying into a 80-knot headwind, that's why. So it turns out that the jet stream follows a course around the Earth so that if you launch a balloon from Asia, it will eventually, in relatively short time, end up over North America. And during World War II, the Japanese launched 3,800 incendiary balloons. They basically just put incendiary fire-causing explosive, attached it to a balloon, cranked up a timer so that it would drop the incendiaries in 4.5 days, whatever they calculated it would take for it to get to America. And so 3,800 of these Japanese balloons ended up flying over America. Did almost no damage, but, and somebody pointed out something to me in the comments, or sent me an email. There were 6 Americans who were killed during World War II, who were killed in action during World War II inside the continental United States. And that was because 6 soldiers were killed when one of these incendiary bombs dropped and killed them. That was a combat death that happened inside continental U.S. They're the only 6 that it happened to. Also killed, I want to say, another 5 or 6 civilians. So the balloon thing is something that is achievable and easy and cheap. Now, I'll tell you what concerns me. What concerns me is that this balloon, the first one that was shot down, was not the first balloon. And what concerns me is not Chinese balloons over the country. That doesn't concern me at all. What concerns me is that the United States government would allow balloons from China to fly over the United States of America without telling the citizens of the United States of America that this was happening. That scares the piss out of me, frankly. That this kind of thing could be continuing and having our government determine. This is the whole issue right here, right? This explains the fraud. It explains the COVID. It explains everything, all of it. If you get to the point where the people in the government believe that they know better for what is good for the American people than the American people do, then that is where your problem is. This sense of elitism, where they say, well, we shouldn't tell the American people about this because maybe they'll get upset or maybe they'll panic or whatever. That is the end of everything. That's the rot. That's the corrosion. That's where the problem is. That's what has to go. That has to go. That. So I don't care about whether there's a Chinese balloon over the country so much as I care about the fact that this has apparently happened a number of times, and it wasn't deemed important enough or too important to tell the American people about this. That is shocking. And picking up where I was going with this was Tom Bombadil says, who released the fact that it was a Chinese balloon? No, somebody spotted this thing, but who identified it or released it as a Chinese spy balloon? The reason that we know about it, because they've been happening before, the only reason we know about it is because an American civilian got such a high quality picture of it, and other civilians start getting enough quality pictures of it, that it got picked up essentially from the UFO angle. And once there were enough pictures of it, then they couldn't deny it anymore. Right? They couldn't deny it anymore. So, okay. Aesop says, in caps, how do we know they're not dropping more viruses on us? We don't know that. Bigger issue about viruses is if you make one as a bioweapon to make it highly contagious, it essentially doesn't matter where you drop it. Right? COVID, one of the variants of COVID will be here forever. It's never going to go away. It's like cold and the flu. It's part of the viral environment, and it's always going to be there, and there's nothing we can do about it. So I don't know what the Chinese balloon does. It certainly appeared to be a surveillance device. Like I cannot possibly conceive of it being anything else. But I do find it interesting that once it was forced to the public consciousness, mostly because of the UFO angle, right? My God, what's this thing flying over? Oh, is it a flying saucer? Oh, let's cover that. I find it kind of shocking that they shot down a Chinese balloon. I found that shocking. But then, was it 3 more in the next week? That is telling me that there's some kind of conveyor belt going on up there that we know about, the government knows about, and didn't do anything about. Why? There may be a good national security reason for why they think they can't tell us. But certainly it's not the kind of information like, when is the D-Day invasion going to happen? The fact that these things have been overflying the country and not telling the American people about it is alarming. And the great analogy to this balloon thing is the Sputnik scare, right? Here we are sitting in America. We've got the oceans between us. There's nothing the Reds can do. They don't have any intercontinental weapons of any real magnitude and so on. And we go to sleep on, I want to say, the night of October 6th, I think, 1957. Not sure about the date. Wake up the next day and find out they put a satellite in orbit. And now all of a sudden, you got in your backyard in Ohio, and overhead is beep, 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 beep. There's a Russian satellite up there. And a couple months later, there's a big one with a dead dog in it. And now, all of a sudden, you realize, well, we're vulnerable. But they did not keep that information from the American people, right? There was a national panic over that. And that national panic, that Sputnik scare, is what drove so many young American kids into engineering. We went to the moon because of the people who got into engineering because of Sputnik. It was good for the country. And this is why I'm so desperately angry and worried about the fact that our government doesn't think that we're smart enough or capable enough to handle it. This is what elitists do. They think they're smarter than other people. They're not. They're not. I'm not going to go into the whole collective intelligence thing again. Nobody knows the answer, but all of us know the answer. Take all of our guesses and average them. We're right all the time. October 4th, right? No one of us knows the answer, but all of us together do. And these people think they're smarter than 30 million of us, and they're not. So, I don't know what these balloons are. I would like to have think that I lived in a country where we had enough of a news media left that there would be overwhelming demand for video cameras to be there when they pick these things up, and a demand to know what's on this thing. But it's just gonna blow away like a balloon. Just gonna disappear down the memory hole, right? We're never going to find out what's on this thing again. Not because it's top secret, because they don't think we should know. And maybe it's because they think it's embarrassing to them, because it is. We were talking about on the Right Angle show, I think Scott teed it off, and it's like, now that we know about it, the American people will just shoot it down. I said, yeah. I think Scott said we just get it with an Estes rocket. I said, yeah. Make me a 17-stage Estes rockets using D engines, have the top stage of the Estes rocket be a shotgun shell. We'll shoot it down ourselves. We don't need the government to do that for us. Completely agree, but I'm serious about that. We wanted to get that thing, we could get it. Interesting question that just flew through my mind is, probably not. Would it be possible to construct civilian, just people, regular civilians, with just, Home Depot money? Would it be possible to construct either one or a collection of lasers that you could get on the civilian market? Would you be able to get enough of those to put a hole in that thing? Probably not, but I'm not sure. I've seen some pretty powerful, crazy powerful, like a 1-watt laser or a 10-watt laser. That's a lot of power in your hand. It'll go right through. One of the things they do is burst balloons. But see, that's the kind of thing that gives me hope. Because frankly, I think that would just be absolutely freaking awesome. I think it'd be awesome if a bunch of Americans got together, everybody chips in crowdfund the thing. For $50,000, you've got a van with a portable diesel electric generator, and you drive into the flight path of this thing, which is not crowdsourced, but crowd intelligence, right? People just keeping an eye on it. Where is it now? It's this kind of thing like the thing with on 4chan trying to figure out where Shia LaBeouf put his flag. Okay, it's coming over here now. You get these guys with this van, and they drive their butts out there, and they've got a bunch of these 5-watt lasers basically tied together. And nice thing about it is it's not moving real fast, right? You can just using simple optical handheld. When I say handheld, I mean the kind of stuff that you use to control like a telescope, like very fine worm gears, that kind of thing. You put a laser beam on that balloon for quite a long time. That is what would make me happy. That's what this country's all about. Government says you can't know about this. It's not, well, now you know about it. We'll shoot it down with a billion-dollar jet, and then we'll make you forget it. And we don't forget it. We just shoot them down ourselves. That's what we do. That's what the American people do. We'll shoot them down ourselves. I think that would be so much fun. I just think that would be just really cool. But we're going to have to do something about this balloon gap. Uh, I think that'd be just incredible. I do remember them. I said this on the Right Angle show too. I remember them saying when they got the first one, they said, "Why'd you use a missile against it?" And they said, "Well, because if you shoot it with bullets, bullets just go through it. It takes a long time for it to come down." That's true. We were talking about Frank Luke earlier. It's not easy to shoot a balloon down. Most of the bullets go right through it. But I'm thinking to myself, isn't that kind of the optimal answer? Is to shoot some holes in this thing so that it comes down slowly? Isn't that like ideal? It's just barely possible they were worried about where those rounds would land because you shoot rounds in the air, they got to come down somewhere. Anyway, let's see what we got here. Oh, well, we're not going to. Bad news is we're not going to do Facebook. Good news is we'll get all of the ones here at billworld.com anyway. Chris Taylor, in Larry Niven's classic The Integral Trees, a totalitarian AI attempts to recruit the main characters by encouraging them to murder a character they believe to be a mutineer. Niven explains it thus. The principle was simple and had served the state before. To further the cause, a potential convert was ordered to commit some obscene crime. He could never repudiate the cause after that. To do so would be to admit that he had committed an abomination. Do you think that, end of quote, do you think that observation, with the pronouns switched to she, might explain the behavior of many leftist women regarding their right to abortion, the non-human nature of a fetus, and the evilness of the pro-lifers that really secretly just want women enslaved in the kitchen making sandwiches? Do you see that anywhere with the leftists besides abortion, or is it all just a sacrifice to Satan for their party's continued power? Chris, I think we got a lot of that earlier, but you have hit on a point that I did not hit upon, and I think it's really important, and that essentially comes down to complicity. One of the things that murderous regimes do, the Nazis did this and the Soviets did it, and virtually all of them do it, is that they will make a number of people complicit. If there's a bunch of people to be executed, they will say, you don't have to go shoot 50 of them, just go shoot 2. And then you either get along or maybe they shoot you, right? So by making you complicit, it's like a check valve, right? It's a one-way valve. You can dance around evil and come back from evil so long as you don't commit evil acts. But once you murder for evil, you don't come back from that. So it's in the interest of people who are committing abominations to get as many people as possible to commit at least an abomination or a part of an abomination, because once they do, now they're complicit. Now they're inside the evil, right? They not only can't escape it legally, they can't escape it psychologically. They've done it. So once you've done it, you might as well go in, all in. One of the things that these mass murderers, and I say state mass murderers like Chekists or SS guys, one of the things you find about them, and it's not a big mystery, is that when you ask them, you find out that killing an innocent person is horrific. Killing the second innocent person later, not quite so horrific. After you've killed 10 innocent people, you don't even think about it. So that's how complicit works, right? So, yes, what they want is complicity. I've told the story many times. I'll try to keep it brief. When I was in high school, I was giant physics astronomy nerd for my sophomore and junior years, 10th and 11th grade. In 12th grade, I had already discovered I had a vision problem, keep me out of the Air Force Academy, so I might as well just make movies and all the rest of it. And since we were making movies, I went from being like super nerd to being relatively popular. I was a high value man because a lot of people wanted to be in the movies and they were very successful and a lot of fun. So I started getting invited to parties I'd never gotten invited to, and I'm being funny there, and everything's great. And I was at one of these parties I was in. Now, this is 1977, okay? So it's a different time, but I would have done the same thing, just so the younger of you out there know. Marijuana usage in 1977 was a serious crime, right? That's not a trifle. And I started going to these parties as a senior in high school. And I was at one of these parties, and there was probably 8 or 9 people in the room, and they were passing this joint around, and everybody's taking a hit off the joint. It came around to me, and I decided I didn't want to do this because I'm a Boy Scout, eldest son. We're the lawful good guys. I did not make the slightest comment either openly or subconsciously. I don't think I never said anything to condemn any of it. I just said no thanks. And when I said no thanks, everything changed. All of a sudden, everybody, the other 8 people in there were determined to get me to take a hit of this thing. And the more they put the pressure on me to do it, the more I dug my heels in. But only after that, years afterwards, when I got a little smarter, I began to realize that one person not being complicit in what was at the time a crime reminded all of them that there was an option to not do this illegal thing. And that by me taking the option to not become complicit in this criminal activity, it made all of them aware of the fact that they were in fact breaking the law, and that's why I had to be made complicit. That's why all of a sudden it was essential to them to get me to take a hit off of this joint. And I just wouldn't do it. Now maybe that's built-in character. God knows I've had my emotional problems over the years, and lots of them, and a bunch of other ones too. But I think I've always had that. My parents tell me that I've always had that fundamental sense of right and wrong, and an unwillingness to do things that I don't think are right, and no matter how big the pressure gets. So yes, I think you're really onto something there, Chris. I think that is a very insightful observation, and I'm going to incorporate that from now on. Yes, I think that's it. I think that the pressure to make women either get abortions or to, at the very least, openly, verbally, publicly champion it is a way of getting them complicit in it. And once they're complicit in it, their resistance to it disappears, essentially. Right? All right. Jacob Belchek. Jacob wins the award, the gold medal, and a large cash payment from BillWhittle.com. Restrictions may apply, for having the shortest question in the history that I'm aware of the comment section here, which is just reassuring to see that much white space. Hail Bill. Hail Jacob. What is the government's responsibility towards promoting righteous behavior? That's a great question. The government has no responsibility towards promoting righteous behavior because you cannot enforce righteous behavior. You cannot coerce people into being virtuous. This is a foundational belief of mine. This system works when you have virtuous people electing a government that leaves them alone. You can't invert the process. This is what we learned from the Soviet Union, right? The Soviet Union, at least on paper, claimed we're going to get rid of greed, envy, acquisitiveness, inequality, disparity. We're going to get rid of all of that. We're going to enforce it, up to and including murder, by the way. And it just doesn't work. The founders said that, one of the founders, I'm ashamed to say I can't remember which one, but basically said that our form of government is only suited to a religious people. It's utterly inappropriate for any other kind. And by religious, he meant religious, but what he was really getting at in terms of operationally, he meant a virtuous society. This form of government, a leave you alone government, requires people who will behave themselves if you leave them alone, as a general rule. Right? Everybody, look, I commit legal violations at the very least twice a day because I drive faster than the speed limit. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good. I'm willing to take the risk for speeding because I'm a good driver. I never drive dangerously fast, and the consequences are manageable if I get caught. And I have gotten caught, although I haven't got caught in 8 years, so I've slowed down quite a bit. However, I'm not willing to do the burglary thing, and I'm certainly not willing to do the murder or the rape thing, not only because I'm concerned about the consequences, but because these are transgressions against my moral code. And if you try to make the government enforce it, you are stuck with you've essentially got Sharia. You've got you've got guys armed with sticks walking up and down the streets enforcing morality codes. Any woman who's dressed too provocatively, or if the hijab is not covering all of their hair, they'll come over and talk to you or smack you with a stick. And if they get angry enough, they'll stone you to death. Islam is is the antithesis of Christianity in this regard. Islam feels that the way to avoid sin is to remove temptation. So that's why in Sharia, in fundamentalist Islam, the way you prevent rape and especially infidelity is by never having to see another woman. It's all just a moving tent as far as you're concerned. So since there's no temptation, there's no crime. That's the way Islam looks at it. Islam deals with the problem of alcoholism by banning alcohol. Islam deals with the problem of premarital sex by banning hand-holding and banning music. And Islam deals with the problem of gambling by strictly enforcing any kind of anti-gambling laws. We, on the other hand, have Las Vegas, which is all of those things rolled into one. It's gambling, prostitution, alcoholism, drugs, prostitution. Did I say prostitution? All of it, right? It's there. And you can go there anytime you want to. And any American, any working American can save up enough money to have a pretty good weekend in Vegas. Any American in this country who works hard can save up enough money to go and live better than any royalty in the history of the world has ever lived prior to 1940. Anybody can go and live better than the richest people on the planet prior to 1940. So, this is why America works. Now, you can argue that Las Vegas is eroding our moral structure, and that'd be a good argument, Vegas and everything else. But the entire point is that Vegas can exist because America was designed as a Christian country, and Christians believe that there is an internal governor of vice, which is your conscience and your connection to Christ and God who sees everything. So you make the decision to go to Vegas or not go to Vegas. When I say go to Vegas, I'm talking about, whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, that kind of thing, right? Yes, Monk in Training says prostitution is illegal in Vegas proper now. I remember hearing that quite a long time ago, being a bit disappointed by that because what's the point? Anyway, what I'm saying here is you can have a Vegas because extremely virtuous people won't go there because of the temptation, but most people can go to Vegas and come out of Vegas without being ruined by Vegas, right? That's moderation. That's your conscience. You go out there and drink more than you used to and have a big party and maybe go to a strip club or something and maybe gamble some money and lose more money than you wanted to lose. But for most people, you haven't ended up on the street through alcoholism. You haven't ruined your marriage through infidelity, and you haven't destroyed your kid's college fund by gambling it all away. Most people can deal with minor vices in moderation, and there's no real harm done. You could actually make the case that it blows off a lot of steam. But you can't enforce it. You can't do what Islamic fundamentalist states do. You can do it, but you can't have a society that you want to live in after that. And you certainly can't have a society where anything gets done. I remember in the early days of the Gulf of the Iraq War, we're talking about maybe 2 years after 9/11. So everybody's got their attention firmly fixed on Islam at the time. And I remember somewhere in that period, somebody said that in that particular year, which would have been 2003 or 4, something like that, that the most advanced invention that Israel had produced was a switching system that appeared to be using some kind of tachyonic. It was switching circuitry faster than the speed of light, or something very close to it. It was something as almost magical technology, right? That's the most important thing that the Israelis invented that year. The most important thing that the Arabs had invented that year, or the Islamicists, I should say, was a buzzer, so that when you put your head down on the mat, it buzzes so that you don't fall asleep when you're doing your prayers, right? Because apparently that's a problem. So, the if you're going to have progress and freedom, you need intellectual lubrication. You need the ability to disagree. You need the ability to test out ideas that may or may not be right or wrong. You can't force people to live a virtuous life by government restriction like they do in Yemen, let's say, and still have a society that can produce moon rockets. If you enforce a level of virtue to the point where you don't have any temptations at all and no freedom, then you're not going to get any results. So, so there you go. Anyway, let's see. Hopefully that'll answer that one. Steve Young? Oh, two questions in one. Steve Young has a question about ATF, and then Joe R. says also abolish the ATF and repeal the NFA. So let's see what the original one was. From Steve Young, ATF equals alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Yep, and as the old saw goes, that should not be a federal agency. That should be a convenience store. That should be the name of a national chain of retail stores, or the main line of it. I hadn't read the question before I said the joke. Or the main line of an invitation to a weekend of partying. Representative Matt Gaetz calls for the abolishment of ATF, the Federal Bureau. What do you think? I'm 100% in favor of it. Absolutely 100% in favor of it. Had no business being there in the first place. And if you abolish any federal agency, you've started a very encouraging trend. Abolish it. I would run on this. And when I say run, I don't mean run as an individual. We talked about this weeks ago, in the days after the 2022 midterms. What is the Republican brand? There isn't one. There is no Republican brand. We all know what woke politics is. We know what the left's brand is. That's why they vote for guys who are brain dead, because they know, okay, Fetterman's not going to vote, but we know how he's going to vote because he's a Democrat. That they voted the brand. They didn't vote the person. We don't have a brand. Our brand should be, we're going to go, our brand is, we're the party of fun. Right? We're the party of responsible fun. We're not saying that there shouldn't be any rules. We're just saying there should be a lot less rules, and that the rules that are there need to be enforced. We'll keep the important rules, we throw the rest of the garbage away, and instead of everything that's not mandatory is prohibited, you get to do whatever you want to within a very small fence around certain things. That's what our brand ought to be. Our brand is not to go to, well, we want smaller government. That's not going to ring with people. Nobody knows. They've been purposely diseducated, uneducated, diseducated. They've been anti-educated. We want small government. Okay, why? Why do you want small government? We don't know how to say this. We don't know how to make our own brand. We don't know how to make a brand, right? So we want small government, and people who might vote for this idea will look at you and say, well, why? Well, because that's the way it was 250 years ago. That's not a compelling argument. It's compelling if you knew what happened 250 years ago, but it's not a compelling argument to most people. So instead of us saying we are in favor of small government, why don't we come out and say we're the party about having fun and freedom. We're the party about doing whatever you want to, so long as you don't hurt anybody else. We're the party about being left alone. We're the people who are saying that if you're out in the middle of a desert somewhere, you can play your music as loud as you want to. If you want to watch fireworks, that's your business too. You can do whatever the hell you want to. You don't get to do it in the middle of a neighborhood on a weekday when everybody's sleeping. But if you want to drive out in the middle of nowhere and do it, rock on, man. That's our entire theory of government. Just think of it that way. Party as loud as you want to, as long as you're not keeping somebody else awake. What's wrong with that? That's perfectly reasonable. Pile into the van, stock up on beer, try to find a designated driver, because that's just good for your safety and the safety of other people on the road. Take a barbecue and a bunch of batteries, haul ass out into the middle of the desert, and see how loud you can play your music. It's not our business. We don't care. We don't care. If you try to do this in a neighborhood, then we have a problem. And this is our theory of government for everything, right? Do whatever you want to. You are free to do whatever you want to so long as you do not infringe upon somebody else's freedom. And that's not a question of meaning hurting their feelings, right? You're not obligated to not hurt anybody's feelings. This whole idea of hate speech, what it comes down to is if you buy this hate speech stuff, right? What you're saying is every single person in the country has to modify their speech so that they will not offend the most easily offended neurotic nutcase in the country. If you're saying that you can't say something that offends people, then you have eliminated language completely. I find it offensive that you say it's offensive. So, not a question of hurting feelings. You don't get to keep people up with your music because your music is in their bedroom. You're not on your own property anymore. You're in their bedroom. I said go on out to the desert. Let me rephrase that for clarity. If you have a house and you have soundproofing to the degree that you can crank your stereo up so loud that it cannot be heard outside the house, including when people are coming in and out, run your music as loud as you want to. You want to build a basement down there with a little sound lock? Rock on. We don't care. It's not like we're trying to control your music volume. We're just saying you don't have a right to put your music in that person's bedroom while they're trying to sleep. Period. Clear? You don't want them telling you what to do in your room. You don't get to tell them what they're doing in their room. Don't. So, we're getting rid of ATF. Why? Because it restricts freedom and it doesn't do anything. We're not. This is why we don't have a brand. Real quick, Monk in Training here for another super chat. Do you think the traditional vices of Vegas should be legal across all of America? Knowles makes the argument that we do enforce values and we should do more to stop bad behavior. Thoughts? I think Mike's wrong about that. The beautiful thing about the entire idea of federalism, which is really anti-federalism, states should be able to make their own laws. The beautiful thing about Vegas, and the edges have blurred a little lately with, casino gambling on reservations and all the rest of it. But the beautiful thing about Vegas is there's essentially one, right? I mean, Atlantic City, there is one. There's one place called Vegas. And the people that are okay with Vegas work in Vegas. If you don't want to go to Vegas, you don't have to go to Vegas. And I'm definitely against Vegas being brought into your state and every state having a Vegas. But at the same time, I don't have any problem with people going to Las Vegas that feel like going to Vegas. It's perfect. If you don't like Vegas, don't go to Vegas. If you do like Vegas, move to Vegas. Ta-da! So that's my attitude about it. But I'd get rid of the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and I would say, look, we're getting rid of it because it is a restriction on freedom that is not doing any good. And the more restrictions that we put on freedom that don't do any good, the less free we get for no reason. Now, let's all be clear about this. Am I in favor of universal freedom? Of course I'm not. Of course I'm not. What's the other side of the same freedom? Hang on. It's right on the tip of my tongue. I guess it's freedom and equality. People say we want to be free and we want freedom, we want equality. Well, these are antithetical things. You can live in a completely free society where there's nothing but inequality, or you can live in a completely equal society where there's no freedom. And the problem is finding the sweet spot. I don't want to live in a world where everybody is free to do whatever they want to, because I don't believe in people being free to come over and murder my family. I don't believe in that. We're going to take this thing to a rational basis. That is a definition of freedom. Are you free to go around murdering people? No, that freedom you're not allowed to do because it is taking away other people's freedom. It's so simple. It's just so simple, really. It's so simple. Do whatever you want to so long as you don't affect anybody else's ability to do whatever they want to. And when these things come into conflict, adjudicate them by a standard set of rules that are enforced equally to everybody. So we're saying, if we try to abolish ATF, what the left would say is they're trying to make America more dangerous and have more guns out there and so on. So there's no evidence for that. In fact, evidence is crystal clear. Anybody, you don't have to take my word for it, just get a copy of the Sears catalog. Up until maybe the 90s, but perhaps the 80s, but certainly in the 70s. Excuse me. You could walk into any Walmart, Sears, Penny's, most hardware stores. You could walk in, put some money on the table, and walk out with the guns. Guns were everywhere. Kids played with guns all the time. Bang, 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 bang. You're causing violence. We're actually not. The evidence is that when guns were everywhere, there were no mass shootings. And the more we try to lock guns up, the more people come out and start murdering people with guns. That is an undeniable, absolutely undeniable fact. And it is not just a correlation, it is a causality. Because the problem is not the guns. The problem is the elimination of fathers and families to modify the behavior of the people that do the shooting before they get to the point of being shooters, right? Little Johnny comes home for dinner every night, and you have dinner with little Johnny every night, and little Johnny starts talking about how he's kind of enjoying pulling the wings off of flies. Then it's time to have a little talk with little Johnny, not sending him down into the basement with his iPad until it turns out that little Johnny's ended up killing 60 people at his school, right? That's what causes crime. That's what prevents crime. The only factor that correlates across all people in prison, regardless of their race, their religion, their economic background, their geographic location, the only thing that correlates across all of those is what percentage of violent criminals did not have a father in the house. And it's something like 85%. Right? No father at all. And then you got to figure that of the remaining 15%, a significant number of them had fathers that were either useless or damaging. We're not talking about the general population. We're talking about the people who are locked up for violent crimes. It's 80%, 85%. And very similar to this, they found that the one single thing that you could do to make sure that your kids not only don't end up in prison, but actually succeed, you know what the single most important correlation is of all the social variables? It's astonishing. Families that sit down and have dinner together at a table don't go astray. It doesn't happen. And the reason it doesn't happen is so obvious. It's like I said, if you're sitting there with a family that loves you, when you start to go off into the weeds, they will pull you back before you get into the weeds, not after you burn the whole forest down. That's one of the reasons why I ended up with kind of problems I had emotionally and all the rest of it. My family had broken apart by then. I was college, and I didn't have anybody to pull me back from doing all these nutty things. So I got nuttier and nuttier. And the nuttier you get, the nuttier you want to be. And so there you go, right? I did not have the skills that I should have had when I left the nest. My parents got divorced when I was 14, and there's problems before then too. So I got more than some. I grew up with the dad. He put a lot of values into me, but I didn't get the full dose. I didn't get everything that I needed. I got 60% of it, something like that, right? But healthy families are healthy not because they're made out of magic dust, but because the normal deviations that everyone is subject to are corrected out of you lovingly and early. Early. That's the trick. It's very much like, I can't finish a show without talking about aviation, right? You fly an instrument approach to landing. It's a relatively old system now, but it's old because it works so well. It's got to be at least 50 years old. It's called the ILS, Instrument Landing System. And essentially what the ILS is all major airports have these, and most decent-sized airports have them. So the ILS is essentially a series of radio beams that come out at an angle. And one of these beams, like this one, is telling you when you're right where you're supposed to be, it goes hum, and if you get above it, it goes wrong, and if you go below it, it goes wrong. And then the other one does the same thing vertically. So the horizontal one's called the glide slope. The other one's called the localizer. This is the center line of the runway. And landing an airplane that's moving at 180 miles an hour with 400 people behind you and the windows painted white, the reason you can do that is because you're not looking out the window because you can't see anything. As long as these two lines are perfectly centered, you are neither left nor right of the center line, and you are neither above or below the glide slope. You keep these things together right on the center like that, and you will come out of the clouds, make a beautiful landing. Now, does that mean that once you get them centered, it's going to stay centered forever? No. Assuming your hand flying, because autoflies fly better than we do, but for the sake of the argument, does that mean it's going to stay that way? No. What it means is, once you get them centered, right, once they start to drift, you have to correct them immediately. If you start to let them drift an awful lot, then the corrections that you have to make become so great. Now you've got lag involved. You get to here, but you've already put in enough input. Now you're above the glide slope. So the entire secret to making an instrument landing is to catch corrections immediately. The slightest little correction, once you see it deviate, you get on it right away. That means you take little tiny little adjustments, and you are never so far off the localizer or the glide slope that you have to do something major, because once you do something major, the tendency to overreact or over oscillate or whatever, it's just nuts. And this is why we haven't had a plane crash in 22 years, because we've gotten to the point now where we've learned enough from having plane crashes to know that if you start seeing these needles doing this and you haven't gotten this thing pegged and you're moving around all over the place, instead of trying to force this thing onto the ground, you say, well, I screwed that one up, full power, gear up, flaps to take off, and we're going to go around and we'll do it again. We'll try and get it right this time. But the entire survival of your life and everybody on board the airplane is predicated on you seeing the slight deviations while there's still slight deviations. If you're not paying attention and you let this thing wander off of the norm, the wider from the norm it gets, the more severe a correction you're going to have to use, and the more likely that correction will be erroneous, overcorrected, undercorrected, who knows? This is the same thing for kids in a family, right? That's how it works. If you children in a family, when they start getting off of that center line, you get them back in on the center line. And you don't let them get all the way over here and then suddenly realize that your kid's building bombs in the basement and decide you have to whip this child to death or put him into prison or send him off to camp or something. You get him early. And problem solved. Ta-da. Hey, speaking of problem solved, turns out that we got through all of the questions at BillWhittle.com and had a lot of fun too as well. So I think it's probably time to wrap this baby up at 3 hours, 37 minutes in. I'll be pleased if the audio was recorded on this one. I'm getting levels, but I don't know. If it turns out it's not, then you're welcome. You're a private show. That's the way it happened. So anyway, that'll do it, I reckon. This show's made possible by the members of BillWhittle.com, who part with their hard-earned money, even in tough economic times. And even when the person they're paying to supply them with firewalls and stuff is busy doing other things, they seem to ride the pony. And my experience has been when they see what the end product is for these other things, they consider to be worthwhile. I hope that's the case. I know it'll be the case for these. We'll have the opening of Cold War. What we saw will be Tuesday on Daily Wire, and I will try and talk to the powers that be and see if we can't find some kind of carve out of some kind for the BillWhittle.com members. I'll do my best. I can't guarantee anything, but I can guarantee you that you'll like the show. The shows are really, those Cold War shows are great, and it's a history that people need to know. Yes, it was an excellent show by Vectron's Golden Claw. All right, so thanks for everything, guys. Thanks for coming. Once again, apologies for the gremlins that come in here at night. Maybe I should lock the door. Maybe I shouldn't leave it propped open like I do, because somebody comes in and starts screwing around with this stuff, and I have no idea how it happened. But there you go, Nick and Aceto. Nice as it could be. Good night, and God bless all. It's as good a close as I think I'm going to find, so we'll see you probably Monday night, but certainly next Thursday right here on your very own Stratosphere Lounge Show.